With the chieftain's demise, a wave of anarchy washed over the throng as the goblins, heedless of any danger, began a violent struggle to seize control. A single goblin snatched the club from the grasp of the deceased leader, transforming the very emblem of authority into the catalyst for a fresh round of bloodshed. Contentious disagreements quickly escalated into lethal violence, with every goblin believing they held the rightful claim to the spoils of their former master. Amid their internal bickering, the chieftain's prized possessions remained unguarded, their presence an open invitation to any who might dare to claim them. The chieftain had perished, yet the guardian responsible for the captured prize was on the verge of making his return. Snarls rippled through the goblin ranks when the one adorned in garments walked toward them, paying no mind to their hostile displays. Irritated whispers circulated among the horde, speculating that he possessed the knowledge of the hidden cache and intended to hoard all the treasure for himself. A voice from within the mob proposed that they should hold back, pointing out that the most powerful among them had already made their move toward the trophy. Piercing shrieks echoed from the nearby knoll, where a group of goblins had descended upon a vulnerable young woman. Her pleas for assistance were lost amidst the cacophony of monstrous jeers and bellows until, without warning, an individual emerged to stand between her and the attackers, revealing himself to be a goblin dressed in clothing. A furious roar erupted from the gathered mass, enraged that this pretender had the audacity to defy those now vying for dominance. Unbridled fury blazed in their gazes, fueled by the conviction that both the captured prize and the young woman were their rightful possessions. He refused to back away, his stride unwavering as he advanced alone to confront the entire hostile assembly. A palpable tension saturated the atmosphere, signaling that a violent confrontation could erupt at any moment. The command was issued to end his life, prompting the goblins to surge forward in a frenzied assault with their fangs exposed. Refusing to yield, he stood firm with a resolute fire in his eyes, clutching a sharpened piece of stone in his hand. In an explosion of fury, the conflict ignited with the speed of a wildfire, as the clang of weapons and horrified shrieks filled the air, while the pandemonium intensified with every moment. The attacking goblins flinched and fell back, discovering that the crude implement he wielded posed a significant danger. A wave of panic swept through his assailants. A shriek was heard, and their advance crumbled into a disorganized and fearful withdrawal. Vows of future retribution were hurled in his direction, yet their terror had eclipsed their avarice, leaving him standing amidst the bodies of the slain, his breath ragged in crimson fluid weeping from his weapon. The young woman quivered, her initial terror giving way to a profound sense of gratitude that softened the look in her eyes. This one, unlike the other beasts, appeared to be something entirely different. He remained perfectly still as a powerful realization echoed in his mind. He did not belong with these creatures, for he was human. A flicker of recollection brought forth pieces of a former life, the glare of headlights followed by the impact of steel, and then oblivion, which led not to a divine afterlife, but to this strange reality, its governing system, and a new existence. While the system was in the process of initializing, it remained largely non-functional, permitting him to view only the most elementary of his attributes. His existence became a constant cycle of careful observation, the struggle for survival, and a relentless quest for knowledge about his new circumstances. This divine realm teemed with monstrous beings, with goblins occupying the lowest rung of the hierarchy, while humanity had established dominance over the continent through its proven might and fortitude. Though he inhabited the form of a goblin, his past as a human remained, and his physical frailty was undeniable, making even the most commonplace adversaries a serious threat. Yet he had managed to endure against all odds, certain that his final chapter had not yet been written, and that his ultimate impact would be significant. A status window appeared, displaying the following information. Name, Linton. Race, Goblin. Level 5, no class. Divine blessing, with the system only partially operational. Within this reality, a specific pathway to gaining greater power existed, which was achieved by means of procreation and the siring of offspring. The goblin species lacks female counterparts, compelling them to capture the women of different races. A desperate need for power and continued existence fuels their violent raids. However, the memory of his former humanity persisted within him, keeping alive his capacity for logic and a sense of integrity, which made it impossible for him to adopt the ways of his goblin kin. The young woman observed him with an expression of comprehension, sensing that he was unlike the others and was not merely a predatory creature. She spoke with a serene tone, her confidence in his nature remaining unshaken, for she perceived his desire to escape a life defined by monstrosity and brutality. The girl pledged to convey the true sequence of events to the knights, emphasizing that he was her savior. She believed in their fairness, and her endorsement represented his only hope of staying alive. He absorbed her words without speaking, his mind a whirlwind of competing thoughts as he found himself caught between a crippling terror and a faint flickering hope. His internal system remained dormant, leaving him without the strength to contend with even a single opponent of equal standing. So awaiting the arrival of the humans offered his best prospect for survival. His strategy was straightforward. He needed to hold out until the knights appeared and then secure their protection, which would grant him the necessary time and opportunity to bring his system to full operational status. A glimmer of hope remained, though the path toward it was paved with terror and suffering. The only requirement was to persevere for a short while longer, without succumbing to his monstrous nature. He yelled for the young woman to take cover as an imminent threat drew near. Another goblin charged at them, bellowing its claim to the captive. He understood that the path to greater power was synonymous with survival itself, a journey that demanded he never surrender, never falter, and always press forward, regardless of the agony. His assailant collapsed to the ground after the goblin in garments delivered the mortal wound, and just then, figures emerged in the distance, their armor gleaming, revealing the arrival of a knightly order. He presumed the approaching group to be the Holy Order, believing that his deliverance was finally at hand. With relief flooding their hearts and a nervous flutter in their chests, they hurried to greet the arrivals, only for a knight's blade to flash out and slice deep into the goblin's body. The armored combatants battled with a savage intensity that the goblins were unable to repel, and one knight swore in frustration as an opponent managed to rip his cloak. A status display materialized, showing the knight's details. Name, Loader. Race, human class swordsman, level 25. Never before had he witnessed a level so high. An overwhelming power was evident in the knight's every motion, as if the very air recoiled from his presence. The young woman let out a cry and ran toward the one she believed to be her saviors, her eyes streaming with tears of elation. Without warning, the knight brought his sword around in a vicious and unhesitating arc, aiming a brutal strike. Shoving the girl aside to spare her from the mortal attack, the goblin absorbed the entire force of the warrior's blade with his own body. A profound shock seized both of them, as they could not comprehend the reason for the assault, having viewed the knight as a protector and deliverer. While the gloom of the cavern could have been misleading, the strike had been delivered with far too much precision to be a mistake. The knight gazed down with open contempt, his voice frigid and saturated with a profound loathing. He charged her with being defiled, pronounced her honor forfeit, and proclaimed that she was entirely undeserving of rescue. He leveled an accusation for something that had not transpired, rejecting any notion of her innocence. His speech was venomous, a cold betrayal that amounted to utter condemnation. The goblin remained a quiet observer, a guardian rather than an adversary, as the girl attempted to clarify that she remained untouched solely because of his intervention. Yet the commander's loathing proved more powerful than any appeal to logic or fairness, causing the deep-seated faith she once held to disintegrate before her very eyes. The young woman spoke in the goblin's defense, certain that the principles of truth and righteousness would ultimately vindicate them. A smirk crossed the knight's face as he dismissed her words, judging her to be a simpleton, and he lifted his blade to sentence her to die with the other monstrous creatures. The goblin shouted for her to escape while she still could, then leaped to intercept the descending sword, obstinately blocking it with a wooden club. The entire situation could have concluded then and there, but another form suddenly materialized, that of a young woman dressed in white, to whom prayers to the Holy Virgin were directed. The name Ifraya resonated like a promise of salvation, for she was a representative of the temple. The goblin stopped short, recognizing her from Kelia's descriptions as a potential lifeline. He made an attempt to communicate, to articulate that he was not a beast, but had formerly been a man, and he pleaded for a single chance, vowing to reveal everything if they would only take him in. The Holy Virgin expressed astonishment at his speech, which was far too articulate for a typical goblin, and her expression softened, showing a flicker of doubt rather than scorn. She conceded that an intelligent goblin was an anomaly, suggesting it might even be a miracle, while Kelia affirmed that he had never once caused her harm and had in fact been her rescuer. He had provided food, given protection, and shown care, acting in a way completely unlike the rest of his kind, prompting their cautious decision to take him with them for further study. He consented immediately, as the choice was clear and no alternative path existed, giving rise to the possibility of a new life, now that a voice of reason had emerged from among his foes. His fate now rested with them, hinging on the temple, its people, the system, and a small measure of hope. He exhaled in relief that a rational mind had finally prevailed. To remain in this place was to accept death, leaving him without any real choice, so he resolved to accompany them to demonstrate that he was not the monster they presumed. The Holy Virgin beckoned, and he gave a nod of assent. Recognizing the opportunity as genuine, Lorder gave the command to depart, and the goblin's reply was both firm and resolute. He conveyed his gratitude for her clemency, a new ember of hope igniting in his chest. And as the goblin started forward, his voice was filled with sincerity. The Holy Virgin gave a slight nod, her expression serene. But as he turned, he froze in horror at the sight of the girl impaled upon a cold steel blade. Her form crumpled to the grimy cavern floor like a discarded marionette, and a paralyzing shock consumed him, erasing all thought and leaving only searing pain. Freya's voice was now glacial, offering a vow of punishment instead of deliverance, and she swore that a reckoning for all transgressions would come upon their return. The goblin's hands balled into fists as anguish gripped his heart. Yet the internal fire of his will and resolve only intensified and burned hotter. The faint light of hope was slowly extinguished by an icy wave of despair, and what had been a budding trust was irrevocably tainted by betrayal and bloodshed. A week elapsed, and the city carried on with its daily rhythms, though the specter of recent events had not yet faded from its thoroughfares. Crowds congregated in the main square, where whispers circulated about the impending arrival of the one known as the Divine Child. The town's populace still bore the fresh memory of the terror from the last goblin incursion, an attack under the cloak of darkness that had claimed 30 helpless residents. A mix of anger and grief had taken root in their hearts, making vengeance a sacred duty, for goblins were seen as a cursed race and an ancient enemy to all of humanity. The Holy Order had sworn a solemn vow to exact retribution for every last drop of blood that was spilled, promising no mercy or leniency toward their foes. Acting on the temple's directive, the swords of righteousness descended upon the goblin den, and the adversaries were annihilated with merciless cruelty. The citizens celebrated, believing vengeance was served and justice had prevailed, which in turn solidified their trust in the temple, reinforcing the shrine as a bastion of safety. The clergy urged the people to attend services more frequently, promoting faith as the path to salvation, and the populace bowed in reverence before the knights. The Holy Virgin sat upon her chair, looking smug, well cared for, and utterly duplicitous, while the people remained as they always were, blind, trusting, and obedient. Gold, offerings, and reverent nods all proceeded precisely as orchestrated, while at that very moment a goblin in an iron mask was shackled to a dungeon wall. His voice was nearly broken, but he clung to life despite the relentless torture, and she held him in contempt for his resilience, finding it far too stubborn for such a lowly creature. The poison was already coursing through her veins, and she craved to witness his demise, as his existence was a painful reminder of Kelia's falsehoods and the justice they had forsaken. Her features contorted with a mixture of revulsion, fury, and cold condescension. In her view, he was a trifle, not a person, but mere raw material. Kelia was imprisoned for her treachery, for her act of mercy, for her show of compassion, as their order shows no forgiveness to those who heed the call of their heart. He made an effort to resist, but the venom seared him from within, and his body grew progressively weaker, his thoughts a chaotic storm of pain, remorse, regret, and shattered hopes. In his former life as a man, he had held a belief in the goodness of others and had placed his trust in people. But he now understood that faith in righteousness is what destroys the weak. He was paying the price for his trust, for his foolishness, for his optimism, as the rattle of his chains served as a constant reminder of his new reality. Within the blackness of the prison, the final glimmer of his inner light was being extinguished. His weakness and naivety had led to this, and he was paying the ultimate price. He had been reduced to a plaything, mocked by Loder and Ephraia, who refused to believe any of his claims, and he was now broken and being led toward his death. All hope had vanished, replaced by a cold and unending agony, and he swore that if he were ever given another opportunity, he would make the people drown in their own blood. Just as the darkness was about to consume everything, his system suddenly activated, and the Goblin's life model initiated a restart sequence. An evaluation commenced, followed by a completed analysis which concluded that his death was a direct result of his own foolishness and his failure to remember his true nature. Humans would never grant forgiveness or understanding to a goblin, and the torture he endured had been a testament to this, branding his soul with eternal suffering. "You have perished as one of the most unfortunate reincarnations," the system declared, initiating a reboot and offering a new life with the question, "Do you wish to begin again? Yes or no?" It was his own personal system, the one that had laid dormant for so long, finally awakening, with his death acting as the key and his pain serving as the catalyst. Once again, he was just a goblin, a contemptible being in the eyes of the world, and the system presented a choice: refuse and allow the soul to dissipate, or accept and return with memories intact. This time there would be no forgiveness from him, for his memories were preserved, and being sent back a week into the past offered a chance to redo everything from the beginning. He now grasped the situation completely. This was his chance to get even, to exact his revenge upon Loder and all of his other enemies. The second iteration of his goblin life was about to commence, a new game with a fresh opportunity, starting from the familiar point of the Goblin Cave. The system had granted him a slight increase in strength, a marginal but potentially sufficient advantage, yet the danger remained immediate as the order had not withdrawn. This death would be his absolute last, as the system would not offer another resurrection, demanding extreme caution because his foes were nearby. The Goblin Life simulation system presented itself as a mechanism for predicting future events. Every choice he made would alter his destiny, with each decision leading to a different potential reality. The simulation would run for a 24-hour period, followed by a reward and point allocation. To be able to see the future was to be able to prepare for it, and the scenario began with him located inside the Goblin Cave. 3 choices were presented: unite with the other goblins, flee the area, or conceal himself. Collaborating with the goblins would yield 10 points, escaping would grant 5, and hiding would result in 0. He harbored doubts, knowing the goblins were far too feeble to stand a chance against Loder, but he made his choice to pursue the option that offered the highest point reward first. His plan was to accumulate points, purchase a weapon from the exchange, and then launch a surprise attack by leading the goblins into the fight, despite the slim odds of success. Loder and his soldiers effortlessly crushed the goblin insurgents, teaching him the lesson that he had severely misjudged the goblin's actual strength. 10 points were successfully acquired, achieving his initial objective, but the selection of weapons available in the exchange was constrained by his limited point total. An elven dagger was priced at exactly 10 points. It was lightweight and sharp, offering a bonus of 15 to strength and 10 to speed, making it the ideal tool for an ambush. The attack needed to land on a critical area, providing a chance to neutralize the enemy instantly and conclude the confrontation with a single decisive action. A question arose regarding Kellia's status, specifically whether she was still alive and had avoided capture by the goblins in this new timeline. The specifics of the timeline had shifted, revealing that Kellia was currently living safely in her village, thus fulfilling his promise and relieving his concerns. The pathway was constricted, which suggested there would be fewer guards posted at the cave's mouth, as the knights held goblins in contempt and anticipated an easy assignment. He needed to prepare himself, for the true challenge was about to begin, signaled by a rustling sound that emanated from the narrow passage leading into the cave. Any goblin emerging from the cave was to be dispatched with a hammer, and Loder had also commanded the execution of any girls who attempted to flee. "We must not allow them to reach the village," a knight declared, revealing the Holy Order's readiness to kill even their own people in their pursuit of power. The goblin reflected that there was no option remaining but to engage in combat, as a cry for help signaled that a girl from the Holy City had been abducted and someone was now running toward them through the chaos. One knight hoped for a bounty on her death, but the girl did not, And although it was a deception, he pledged his assistance, knowing the knights had come to eliminate the prisoner. The goblin was certain that the moment for retribution had arrived, and as he returned to exact his vengeance, his strike was delivered with such force that it left no possibility of survival. The knight was now deceased, a dagger having penetrated his chest, while the goblin holding the weapon issued threats and spoke in the human tongue. The remaining knight begged for his life, producing photographs of his family showing a wife and daughter who awaited his return home. He vowed to follow any command and offered to provide gold and deliver the girl in return for being spared. The knight had concealed a dagger and intended to launch a deadly counterattack, but the goblin deflected the move and struck first. The glint of a blade briefly lit up the area, and the knight collapsed, felled by an unforeseen and sudden strike. Loder's voice echoed nearby as he hurried to provide aid, his approach alone striking fear into those who heard it. The goblin swiftly stripped the blood-soaked attire from the fallen knight, and without a moment's hesitation vanished into the deep shadows. Loder and Freya arrived at the location of the conflict, surveying the aftermath of the skirmish with a great deal of suspicion. Loder expressed outrage that the goblins had somehow bypassed the sentries and gained entry completely undetected. They theorized that mutants, a more formidable type of goblin, must have been responsible for the successful escape. Loder kicked at the corpses with contempt, dismissing them as useless weaklings and showing not an ounce of compassion. Either the Holy Virgin would have observed the mutant goblins and their unique characteristics with keen interest, which prompted her to consider potential new threats. A deep quiet settled over the field, but the menace emanating from the dark recesses of the area continued to hang over everyone present. The goblin finally experienced a sense of vindication. If humans loathed him with such intensity, then he must truly become the nightmare they imagined. Goblins possess a singular capacity to increase their strength through the acts of mating and absorption. This time around, he was resolute in his goal to alter the course of events, to instill fear in every man and compel every woman to submit to him without resistance. Yet, in a deep recess of his mind, the goblin still harbored a lingering fear, wondering if Loder and his soldiers were continuing their hunt for him. He had a clear understanding that delivering the initial blow was essential to securing a critical edge in the upcoming conflict. Unexpectedly, another figure appeared near the water source, causing the goblin to startle, since to his knowledge, goblins only ever produced male offspring. A goblin girl, who had only intended to fetch some water, pleaded with him not to strike her, explaining that she was just a small goblin of the 3rd level, with her race listed as goblin. Her class was designated as God's messenger, and her titles included Goblin Girl, Fallen Goddess, Pure Soul, and Blessed by God. It was said that if a male goblin were to unite in marriage with a female goblin, he would ascend to become the legendary goblin god. The goblin contemplated the idea that by marrying her, he could seize immense power and transform into a genuine goblin deity. The girl meekly explained that she had only been dispatched to retrieve water, and that failure to do so would result in her death at the hands of the chief. The goblin's demeanor softened, as he had no wish to frighten her, and he urged her not to cry, warning that any screams would likely draw the attention of Loder and his men. She expressed her astonishment, noting that he communicated in the same manner she did, whereas other goblins were incapable of such articulate expression. She was taken aback by his kindness, as the other goblins had only ever beaten and berated her, and they certainly had never engaged her in conversation. For the very first time, she experienced a sense of warmth, and she suggested that if he had no other place to be, he could accompany her to her tribe. The girl asserted that her tribe was located in the vicinity, and he reasoned that while now was not the moment for mating, his primary objective was to secure a safe haven. The goblin readily accepted her offer, his main preoccupation being the question of how to gather subordinates to augment his own authority. Upon reaching the encampment, they found themselves in a settlement of numerous tents, from which columns of smoke from campfires ascended. Goblins were active throughout the camp, engaged in conversation and casting wary glances at the newcomer. A number of the goblins muttered to one another, expressing their surprise at his manner of walking, which seemed far too human for them to comprehend. Others simply jeered, dismissing him as some sort of anomaly. However, despite the palpable confusion, the camp itself was impressively large and well-structured. The goblin initiated contact by stating his wish to become part of the tribe, and then inquiring about who was their leader. The other goblins regarded him with distrust, with some even proposing that they should apprehend the stranger and determine his fate at a later time. However, a senior goblin, who was both wise and shrewd and possessed a high level, along with titles that commanded respect, stepped in to mediate. He inquired as to what had led the stranger to their tribe. While many had initially wanted to kill the newcomer for a celebratory feast, the goblin managed to persuade them otherwise. He possessed the skill to fashion weapons and various tools, and he vowed to do so on the condition that the tribe would grant him access to a source of iron ore. He would forge the essential implements and armaments they required to make the entire goblin force more formidable. The elder goblin found the proposition valuable, and the newcomer observed that intelligence and level were key factors influencing a goblin's capabilities. The chieftain surmised that with iron weaponry, the tribe could overcome not only monsters but also humans, thereby solidifying their standing. A renewed sense of hope filled the air, and the entire mood within the camp shifted, as the goblins now felt prepared for new conquests. The goblins began to discuss how iron weapons would eliminate their fear of humans, and might even enable them to challenge the elves. They fantasized about journeying to the north and even procreating with elves as a means to further strengthen their tribal lineage. The high priest resolved to offer the newcomer a chance to demonstrate his worth and validate his claims of strength. He was given a 3-day deadline to mine iron ore and forge a weapon, with the understanding that failure would result in his and his companions' deaths. The priest strode confidently back into his tent, leaving a charged and tense atmosphere in his wake. The goblin recognized his current inability to offer any resistance and opted to play for time, hoping to create a weapon and grow stronger. However, the journey to procure the ore proved to be an arduous one, during which Yue voiced her exhaustion on several occasions and was subsequently disciplined for it. The new goblin issued a firm command for the ore to be gathered, delivering a warning that every single goblin was required to return with at least a small fragment. The goblins were filled with fear, for they were facing an individual armed with an iron weapon who could easily overpower them, leaving them with no choice but to obey. Meanwhile, they schemed that once they possessed weapons of their own, they would be able to dispatch him immediately. To achieve this, the newcomer would need to endure a series of harsh trials and significantly enhance both his abilities and his spirit. He also recalled the legend that a goblin man who marries a goblin woman is destined to become a goblin god. He understood that the time had come for him to grow and increase his power, so he approached Ue, the young goblin to whom he had pledged his protection. In order to bring his plans to fruition, he required her assistance, and while Yu was initially hesitant, she ultimately gave her consent. Their bond advanced to another plane as they shared a kiss, an act that signified the start of a new partnership and a hope for what was to come. She expressed her desire for him to become more powerful and requested that he allow her the opportunity to bear his child. She was destined to deliver 7 offspring, and upon their birth, the newcomer was granted a substantial power-up, including bonuses to his attack, health, and defense. The small goblin steadily advanced through the levels, gaining new titles and powers along the way. He was progressively changing into a creature of greater blessing and might, conquering obstacles and adversaries as he went. The rise in his level not only augmented his strength, but also refined his physical appearance, causing clearly defined muscles to emerge on his frame. He declared with conviction his unwavering loyalty to her and vowed that he would forever be her relentless defender. All of a sudden, loud cries for assistance were heard from nearby, abruptly shattering the long-awaited tranquility of their surroundings. The goblins shrieked in terror at the sight of a demonic wolf, scrambling to flee and shield themselves from the ferocious beast. The goblin came to a sudden halt when he saw that one of his retreating tribe members was tightly holding a chunk of iron ore. He realized it instantly. The ore had been located, but its discovery had brought trouble in the form of heavy breathing, thudding footsteps, and a rapidly approaching shadow. The goblin tightened his grip on his weapon and charged directly at the monstrous creature, his strike landing with precision. The wolf, caught off guard by the resistance, collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud and a groan, staining the grass with dark patches of blood. Walking up to his terrified kinsman, the goblin held out his hand, demanding the ore, and the other goblin silently relinquished his find. Closing his fingers around the weighty chunk of metal, he gave a nod of approval and promised that he would reward future discoveries with newly forged weapons. He began his work at once, his entire being radiating focus, with his face obscured by shadows and his hands moving with tireless diligence. One of the goblins even proclaimed with pride that this particular warrior had not only slain the wolf, but had also rescued the entire group. When the finished weapon was revealed, a wave of excitement spread through the tribe, and the iron spear felt like a symbol of new power in their hands. Even the chieftain, who had been observing the situation with a degree of apprehension, could not conceal his astonishment, though a cold calculation lay behind his smiling facade. He presented a new ultimatum: to produce 50 weapons within a span of 2 days, and only upon successful completion would the newcomer be granted permission to remain. The goblins murmured among themselves in a state of confusion, acknowledging that the task was severe but also fundamentally just. The girl voiced her readiness to assist, and several other goblins followed her lead, as their time was extremely limited. When the designated day came, the armaments were arranged in orderly rows, and the chief strode along the lines, inspecting each piece before giving a nod of approval. He then declared that the celebratory feast to welcome their new brother into the tribe would be held that very day. That evening, every goblin ate until they were full and shared laughter around the campfires, celebrating the iron will and bit of fortune that had altered their destiny. The tribe had congregated around a massive bonfire, where meat was sizzling over the flames as a sacrificial offering in honor of Ling Tian. Yue informed him that all the preparations had been made with great care, specifically for him and in anticipation of his formal induction. He began to partake of the food, but he was suddenly assailed by a tickling sensation in his throat that made it hard to breathe, causing his body to weaken to the point of collapse. The old priest, who served as the tribe's leader, observed this development with a derisive expression, confident that the poison would take effect swiftly. The newcomer had behaved with too much assurance and had too cleverly manipulated the goblin's trust. The chieftain had firmly resolved that the moment had arrived to definitively and permanently put a stop to this insubordination. He seized Yu in a rough grasp, intending to degrade her and assert his complete dominance over everyone present. However, he was not quick enough, for Ling Tian rose to his feet with his breathing now steady, having anticipated this entire scenario as part of his own elaborate scheme. With a sudden, swift motion, he lunged forward, drawing a concealed blade and landing a precise blow that ignited the start of a fierce battle. The onlooking goblins were simultaneously filled with terror and exhilaration as they witnessed the intense and perilous confrontation unfolding before them. The leader attempted to mount a defense, but Ling Tian had already surpassed him in both physical and spiritual strength. He overwhelmed his adversary with a devastating strike during the fight, causing the old leader to fall to the ground, mortally wounded and beyond any hope of recovery. Ling Tian stood over the defeated body, his authority now cemented through combat, and after a moment of silence, the tribe erupted in celebratory cheers. A fresh chapter had commenced, one defined by a formidable leader prepared to guide them into conflicts against humans, elves, and any other force that dared to obstruct their path. A grand campaign of vengeance was underway, one that no one would be able to halt as its power expanded daily and was utterly merciless. An elven girl observed the unfolding events from the concealment of dense shrubbery, keeping to the shadows. Upon her return to her home city, the other elves struggled to keep pace with her, pleading for her to slow down, but she was informed that her mother was occupied and could not see her at that moment. Inside the palace, her mother, the queen, was indulging in grapes with a languid pleasure, lounging in the shade provided by her elven attendants and a canopy made from the most exquisite materials. Upon seeing her daughter approach, she was initially inclined to continue her leisurely meal, but her curiosity ultimately won out. Her attendant stopped the princess, calling her foolish and commanding her to deliver her message, since she had arrived in such a rush with supposedly vital news. The princess began to tell of a goblin tribe, a group that had always been regarded as weak and inconsequential creatures. Within the enchanted forest, she had witnessed an event that had profoundly disturbed her conventional and long-held understanding of the world. The signs of a violent struggle, the distinct scent of goblins, and the carcass of a massive bear known as the most savage predator in the region all indicated an impossible occurrence. A few days prior, she had observed a young goblin slay the old chieftain and was now leading the tribe toward a new level of strength. The queen, showing little outward surprise, commanded that a detachment be formed with the mission to eradicate the goblins, but to capture a few of them alive. It had been discovered that goblin hearts could be used in the creation of tonic potions specifically for male elves. The princess was visibly uncomfortable with this, but the queen commended her for her report and even proposed a handsome young elf as a reward for her service. She declined the offer, giving the excuse of a scheduled evening inspection, and her mother simply smirked as she watched her daughter depart. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, discussions were being held about the elven dwellings, which were intricately woven from branches and leaves among the trees. Approximately 30 such structures were situated high above the forest floor, forming an entire settlement across the treetops and rock formations. The new goblin commander was making preparations for an attack, having promised to capture the elves, and his warriors were eagerly anticipating the upcoming battle. Cries of affirmation and praise for their leader resounded through the canopies of the trees. He had made a calculation that the elves possessed 30 dwellings, with 2 occupants each, bringing the total to around 60. And with the addition of mine workers and security, the number was closer to 70. Following the demise of the previous leader, the goblin had not squandered any time, instead organizing resource gathering and dispatching his kin on hunting expeditions. In order to educate and fortify the tribe, the time had now come to commence preparations for an offensive. After a successful hunt where they took down a wild pig, his physical prowess increased, and after eliminating a mountain monkey, he gained the skill of purification. His group, during a confrontation with a large snake, managed to acquire the ability to produce a secret poison ideal for applying to their weapons. His levels were climbing at an impressive rate, and the leader, once an ordinary goblin, had now reached level 18. His title served as a clear indicator of his advancement, as he was now known as a monster hunter and a slayer of the forest's most formidable beasts. The cumulative combat strength of his body now surpassed 250 units, which rendered him more powerful than the elves, whose average strength was no more than 200. The elves would soon discover that their adversary had undergone a significant transformation, becoming intelligent, organized, and lethally effective. He intends to launch a clandestine assault on the elves, recognizing that discretion is paramount to achieving success. And the system activates a skill for the impending conflict between goblins and elves. He marches with his goblin army toward the elven tribe, but the elves detect their approach, revealing that it is an ambush. The goblins are apprehended and now face the prospect of execution and public humiliation, leaving their hopes dashed, their plans in ruins, and their mission score at 0. He comes to the realization that he has been lured into a trap, which means someone has been monitoring his every action. The goblins possess exceptional hearing and sensitivity, and by focusing his senses, he successfully detected the presence of tracks. It became apparent that the goblins were organizing an assault on the elven tribe, and the daughter intended to relay this intelligence to her mother, who received the news. Suddenly, an arrow struck her body, and she could feel her life force slowly and permanently draining away. The victim was an elf, with an arrow lodged deep in her leg, from which a searing poison was spreading, gradually infiltrating every cell of her body. Catching her was not a simple task, but she eventually fell into one of their traps, at which point they initiated her capture and gave the order to seize everyone. The goblin's concoction had a pronounced effect on the elven girl, and the main elf was intentionally kept alive, as her capture had been anticipated. This development significantly improved their prospects of vanquishing the elves, as the goblins had now abducted the princess and were getting ready to attack the elf clan. The elves will not show mercy to the kidnappers, and the elf issues a threat to annihilate every goblin in the forest, sparing only a handful. The goblins remain confident in their power, believing that their numbers in the jungle are too vast for them to all be exterminated. The chieftain planned to expand the number of his descendants by utilizing the princess as a central component of his strategy. The mother, deeply concerned by Kasana's prolonged absence, makes the decision to dispatch a search party to find her. The assault began without warning, as a volley of arrows swiftly rained down, striking the guards and eliminating them one by one. The goblin announced the successful capture of Kasana, declaring that he now held control over the territory and possessed absolute authority here. He gives his assurance that they will soon become one family and extends an offer for them to side with the invaders, while also issuing threats to his adversaries. Following the battle, the elven mother was left lying on the ground, her body pierced by a dart coated in the goblin's liquid. This particular fluid induces immediate paralysis and decay in living tissue, spreading fear and a sense of powerlessness. The goblins had arrived to settle their grievances and usurp power, and their new leader represented a significant cause for alarm. The opportunity to fight back had passed, and while the elves cried out for aid, their strength was rapidly fading. The goblins had now achieved a level of strength equal to that of the elves, which upended the established balance of power and fear. Grasping this new reality necessitated swift and decisive action, as well as thorough preparation for the unavoidable changes that lay ahead. The elven mother was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of the goblins' power and the continuation of her children's future. The mother was consumed with worry, acknowledging that the destiny and future of the elves were now inextricably linked to the goblins. She was burdened by a profound sense of guilt for having underestimated their foe and understood the dire repercussions this misjudgment had brought upon her people. Among the elves, only women and children were left, and they were now compelled to seek a collaborative existence with the goblins. The elves who were held in cages received 3 meals a day, but their existence was under constant and watchful scrutiny. The mother pleaded for her children to be cared for, as she was unable to simply observe their growth from within her cage. The young goblins were seen playing with the elven children, and the intermingling of their inherent traits was altering the course of their destinies. Yue was unable to manage the situation by herself, which made it clear that additional support was required. There was now a hope for the clan's resurgence in the fortification of the tribe's overall strength through the growth and nurturing of the children. Their collective forces were growing, which allowed them to anticipate a victory over their enemy in the very near future. A fortnight had gone by, and the preparations for the conclusive confrontation with their foe were picking up speed. The cries of newborn infants could now be heard throughout the settlement, as the elven women were giving birth to goblin children. Many of the women were horrified by their own offspring, viewing them as utterly loathsome. Lentian inquired about the total number of newborns, to which Yue responded that there were approximately 30 to 40. Kasana gave birth amidst pain and terror, but her mother was there to support her, urging her not to lose hope. The delivery was proving to be extremely difficult, and assistance was desperately needed as it was Kasana's first time giving birth. The elf cried out in agony and desperation, but Lentian reminded her that these were also his children, and then stepped in to help. Following a great deal of intense exertion, Kasana's condition saw a remarkable improvement, and the infants were successfully delivered in good health. Lentian played an active role during the birthing process, showing both compassion and proficiency, which earned him genuine praise and gratitude. Some of the goblins were disinclined to comply, but the chieftains sternly reminded the elves that they needed to rest. The leader issued a warning that without a swift recuperation, the new mothers were at risk of dying during this fragile period. From that point on, no one was permitted to touch the elves without his express permission, and the elf matriarch noted that he was quite different from the other goblins. He was certain he was making the correct decision, as everyone required time to recover their strength in order to ensure their continued survival. A new narrative arc had commenced, in which goblins captured elves and compelled them to become pregnant in order to strengthen their own race. Healthy goblins with enhanced characteristics were being born, making the tribe's members more powerful, and he resolved to seek his revenge on Loder. He traveled to Guangming, where he was presented with 3 options: handle everything himself for a reward of 50 points, enlist the help of goblins for 30 points, or simply wait and observe the situation for 10 points. He was confident in locating them shortly, regardless of their powerful allies, as his personal attributes gave him the capability to eliminate Loder, an alternative he ultimately selected. Seizing an opportunity when Loder was isolated, he launched his assault, catching his foe completely unprepared and inflicting a nearly mortal wound. However, Loder's subordinate, known as the Sword Saint, intervened to rescue him. Lentian perished in the ensuing conflict, while the captives were taken to the capital, disappearing from sight thereafter. He possessed no viable way to overcome the formidable blade, earning a rating of 30 out of 100, a reward of 30 life points, and a completion time of 9 days for the attempt. He observed the elven woman and Yue as they transported fruit, knowing Yue would need to assume leadership of the tribe for the next few days. Lentian intended to venture into human lands despite the inherent risks, a plan Yue vehemently opposed, cautioning him about the lethal danger involved. Ling Tian harbored a deep animosity towards humans and yearned for vengeance, prompting the elven woman to offer her assistance with skills related to stealth. The concern shown for his well-being surprised Lentian, but the elf clarified her fear that the elven tribe would face hardship should he perish. The elven mother and children, along with Yue, all held on to the hope that he would come back alive, with Yue vowing to manage the tribe during Lentian's absence. Knowing his course of action, Lentian departed and soon arrived in a city where he observed a significant increase in patrols and defensive measures. He speculated whether the saint known as the Dreamer had made an appearance there, but after making extensive inquiries, he found that nobody had heard of her, which struck him as odd. In the public square, he took note of a large ranking board that detailed the accomplishments of all the valiant knightly factions. The top position was held by the gold-level swordsman, followed by the various silver-ranked rescue squads. Ling Chang came to the conclusion that his scheme for retribution was destined for collapse and failure if he could not uncover any crucial leads. Inside a tavern, Ling Tian eavesdropped on conversations and tales recounting a heroic rescue from a dreadful, demonic monkey. Ephraia had arrived just in time to rescue Loder, and as he recounted the tale, the tavern patrons lauded the captain for his bravery. The monkey had been an amusing foe, they recollected with a smirk, and when Percy was questioned about his own group, he casually dismissed the inquiry. He expressed certainty that his team was capable of handling the situation and winning their wager, mentioning that a malevolent dragon had recently started preying on livestock and harassing people. The consensus was that confronting the dragon was preferable to causing internal strife. For if the dragon were to attack Guangming, the city would descend into turmoil. Yet some of the knights remained unafraid, dismissing it as just another ordinary dragon, especially since the Holy Swordswoman, Percy's mentor, was already en route. They anticipated defeating the dragon with her assistance, avoiding the need for additional forces, and Loder had already invited the saint to join them in vanquishing the beast. If the plan succeeded, Loder would be celebrated as the city's hero, a thought that elevated everyone's spirits and led to a decision to celebrate the anticipated triumph. The dragon's emergence represented a final opportunity for him to shift the tide of events and steer his destiny in a more favorable direction. The teacher offered prayers within the temple as the city celebrated, though no one was brave enough to confront the dragon directly. 10 hunters were positioned around the city's perimeter as commanded, with the knowledge that failure would tarnish the swordswoman's reputation. The Holy Swordswoman was both beautiful and formidable, yet her heart remained guarded. As the dragon drew nearer, the city began its evacuation. Panic consumed the streets as people fled in terror, while Loder and his companion made their way toward the city's fortifications. The dragon was now at the city gates, where soldiers stood poised for the confrontation. With time dwindling, the game was set to begin, and fates were about to be sealed. The dragons were closing in on the city, an event Percy and the swordswoman observed with intense focus. Everyone readied themselves for the dragon hunt as the armaments were loaded, and the battle commenced with the hunters firing, though their arrows proved ineffective. The purple-gold mother of dragons advanced swiftly toward the fortifications, rendering the crossbows useless as the wall neared the point of collapse. The fire-breathing matriarch unleashed a torrent of flames, spreading chaos among the defenders, prompting the swordswoman to take on the responsibility of halting the monster. The other combatants carried on with the city's defense, maintaining strict battle formations and preventing the enemy from breaking their lines. The goblin perched on a hill, keenly observing the unfolding conflict, astonished by the dragon's immense power in combat. The mother of dragons demonstrated a level of might that vastly exceeded all prior expectations and forecasts. The purple-gold mother dragon was identified as a level 79 ancient dragon, the sovereign of the island dragons, and a truly monstrous creature. The goblin chieftain monitored the battle with great attention, carefully gauging the strength and abilities of his adversaries. Alice, a level 80 human holy swordswoman, stood as the most powerful swordsman and a paragon of humanity's strength. Her blade plunged deep into the dragon's flesh, demonstrating that the swordswoman's power was nearly on par with that of the fearsome beast. The dragon mother appeared to be weakening, yet her health pool remained substantial, while the swordswoman's stamina was rapidly depleting, creating an opening for a counterattack. The chieftain intended to exploit this vulnerability to enact his revenge and breach the city's defenses. The goblins let out loud war cries to bolster their morale, steeling themselves for a decisive and savage assault on their foe. Defeating a dragon is a difficult feat, but a beast remains a beast, even in the forest, and Loder was confident in humanity's broad capabilities. The people were terrified, unable to believe that goblins would dare approach the city, as a young girl ran through the streets crying for help. Only a few dragons remained, offering a glimmer of hope for survival, as Afraya and her comrades charged forward to engage the goblins. The goblins shrieked as they attempted to repel the assault, but the captain and the holy maiden found themselves ensnared by a net and surrounded by a volley of arrows. The goblin chieftain materialized suddenly from behind, striking his adversary with a swift and unforeseen blow. The chieftain confidently proclaimed his triumph and commanded the goblins to escort the prisoners out of the city. The remaining forces were tasked with scaling the walls to establish a defensive line, leaving the city's protectors disoriented by the surprise attack. The goblins had patiently waited for their enemy to be at their most compromised state before launching their critical strike. The swordswoman found herself in combat with the reincarnated dragon girl, whom her enemies had mistakenly deemed helpless and defeated. The climactic struggle for the dragon's blood was imminent, and the swordswoman presumed that Loder was occupied fighting the last of the dragons and goblins. A powerful explosion rocked the battlefield, amplifying the existing chaos and disarray, suggesting the conflict with the goblins was far from concluded. The holy swordswoman pressed on with her fight, but the girl suddenly transformed back into a dragon and swiftly took flight. The swordswoman was suffused with resolve, prepared to conquer any challenge to reach the dragon's lair. The swordswoman made her way back to the city, only to find that Loder was missing and the goblins had been vanquished. Loder and Afraya had been taken captive by higher-level goblins, who overwhelmed them with superior numbers and strength. The people grew anxious, realizing these were not the same kind of goblins they had faced before, and Loder had been given no opportunity to react. The swordswoman vowed that she would eradicate every last goblin tribe within the enchanted forest. She was implored to remain in the city due to fears of the dragons and goblins' return, with the argument that the temple's inhabitants were more important than a couple of warriors. Loder was condemned for his own incompetence, with it being noted that if even goblins could defeat him, he stood no chance against dragons. The chief made his return, much to the jubilation of the goblins, and he brought with him 2 new human captives who immediately became the center of attention. The goblins looked upon the prisoners with admiration, commenting on their attractiveness and discussing their exceptional beauty and worth. The tribe's joy was almost tangible, as the leaders returned with new prizes infused them with renewed vigor and self-assurance. The bound humans are seated on the cold earth, encircled by goblins beneath the canopy of ancient trees. The poison gradually corrupts Euphria's system, causing her skin to lose its color and the light in her eyes to fade with each passing moment. Loder observes her condition, powerless to intervene, his jaw clenched with a mixture of rage and terror for her life. The goblin chieftain draws near, his claws glinting and his steps heavy, while the air around him grows thick with a sense of dread. Euphria winces as the goblin's talons pierce her leg, causing blood to trickle down her skin. Loder strained against his bonds with all of his strength, but the powerful restraints prevented him from shielding her from the menace. The goblin leans in, its eyes brimming with malevolence, fully aware that fear is a more potent weapon than physical pain. He pulled back, leaving behind deep, bleeding gashes from his sharp claws on Afria's leg. The stillness is shattered by Loder's scream, a cry filled with a despair and fury that could not alter the inevitable outcome. The leader lets out a confident chuckle, as if he can predict all of his enemies' moves and hold sway over the battle's conclusion. He mutters to himself, thinking of the holy swordswoman as a prize that he has yet to claim. The forest remains silent, concealing those who have erased their trail, and no one has any idea where the captives might be found. The goblin guides the second generation deep into the forest, bringing an end to all the monsters that cross their path. He watches Loder intently, a predatory grin on his face, as if he is planning some form of excruciating torment. His primary objective is evolution, and he will allow nothing to stand in the way of its next phase. The goblins close in around her, poised for a cruel amusement, She collapses and the ground beneath her turns crimson. Loder can no longer bear to watch, for it is already too late, as Lentian savors his initial victory in this new chapter. The goblin stands watch, prepared for any eventuality, following the leader's clear instructions to hold the prisoners, but not to kill them. Afria is bound, her body weakened by exhaustion, but her spirit remains unbroken as Loder pleads with her to endure and not to surrender. Loder makes an attempt to rise, but terror constricts his throat, rendering him unable to speak. Their argument is cut short by a scream that ignites fear in the darkness, as the Lazy One's long simmering rage against humans comes to a boil. The mother and daughter now realize that these individuals are far worse than they had imagined, and with Lentian having vowed revenge, everything is unfolding according to his design. Even the other goblins are afraid of him, for he is unique and dangerous, possessing a strength more terrifying than any physical injury. The elven mother appears to have submitted, her gaze having lost its light, and her heart plummets at the thought of the leader's imminent return. The second-generation goblins have returned far ahead of schedule and are now causing widespread destruction. Before them stands a frenzied goblin at level 33, with the race of goblin and class of warrior, his body radiating power, enhanced attack, and armor as tough as stone. His titles proclaim him as the son of elves and the slayer of monsters, and he carries the mark of a divine blessing, his gaze so intense that even the darkness seems to recoil. This is no longer a simple fight. It signifies the start of the end, as he is a worthy adversary at level 50, with stats nearly matching those of a boss. The hunt had been a success, with all nearby monsters eliminated, and their path now led them to the west. In the dim forest, they came across large goblins, who, like true predators, were exterminating their smaller kin, spreading terror among them. The west is home to the Bloodtooth tribe, a group of goblins who are larger than the norm. These large goblins represent a potential asset for the third generation, as their leaders could shift the entire balance of the war. If we can capture them, our odds against the humans will improve. But Loder scoffs at the idea, viewing all goblins as mere insects. He remains convinced that nothing can stand against the might of the human army, but the leader, remembering him, decides to throw him to the goblins. Loder is gripped by panic, unable to comprehend the fate that is about to befall him. As the goblins close in, anticipating a feast of flesh and blood, Loder's screams are answered only by the echoing forest, while Euphria averts her gaze and closes her eyes. The darkness intensifies, blanketing everything in its shroud as hope dissipates, growing thinner than air and vanishing with each passing minute. Several hours later, a fire crackles as the goblins roast meat, and Lentian discusses their next assault on another tribe. The strategy is straightforward: attack and seize the enemy's leader, and a new name is chosen for their tribe, which will henceforth be known as the Tian Mao. The goblins are filled with inspiration by their new name and new direction, yet their adversary is stronger, more numerous, and more physically imposing. Lentian shows no concern, for he has already formulated a plan, and his eyes settle on the bound form of Euphria, whose destiny will play a role in his grander strategy. From the crest of the hill, a magical forest is visible, their destination now close, and within it lies a concealed power that they must confront. The goblins halt, sensing a nearby threat, as there are more of them than expected, and they say the leader of the Bloodtooth tribe is present. This is not just any leader, but an elite battle-tested one, and the forest itself feels alive, as if it is watching them, while the wind carries the scent of blood and unease. Lentian's eyes gleam with a resolve and a craving for power, as a fighting goblin steps out from the shadows, bearing the symbol of a bloody tooth on his back. He is level 50, one of the most formidable goblins, but he is unlike the others, with the profession of a highest-level warrior. His title is Monster Slayer, and his body is adorned with the marks of divine blessings. His strength, a gift from the gods, and his rage a curse upon his enemies. Capturing them alive will be a challenge, as different poisons have varying effects, so special concoctions must be developed for the plan to be flawless. The forbidden technique that was previously used on him and Euphram could be the decisive element in their confrontation with their foes. The head of security informs him that Euphria is nearly unconscious and is asking for peace, hoping her death will serve as atonement for her past actions. The quiet is broken by a cold touch, followed by the warmth of an embrace. He will honor his promise, but her fate now depends entirely on her. The decision between faith and servitude now rests upon her shoulders, and she is hesitant, caught in an internal conflict, for she is now his possession. The time has come to demonstrate your unquestionable power, as this skill is referred to as Saint in a Cage. The meaning behind that name is both a puzzle and a source of hope, and she readies herself, feeling the gravity and responsibility of the moment. The Saint in the Cage was both a mystery and a trial, and as Euphria neared the cross, a brilliant light enveloped her form. Loder, trapped in his own cage, cried out for assistance, realizing she had now allied with the enemy and questioning if a saint could truly submit to a goblin. Euphria has made a momentous choice, and the new path she has embarked upon is fraught with unforeseen challenges and dangers. Loder descends into madness within his cage, his laughter so unsettling it even frightens the goblins, his mind consumed with visions of the goblin race's collapse and utter annihilation. He is certain that the Church of the Holy Order will be their undoing, and his words are steeped in venom but devoid of any hope. Euphria's defection was the final blow for him, as he never anticipated seeing her align with the enemy. The goblin leader expresses his gratitude for the captive's candor, though his reward will not be freedom. Instead, the goblin intends to keep Loder in a state of perpetual suspense. No comfort will be permitted, and one of the goblins promises to personally oversee him, to which the leader nods, concluding the conversation. Euphria accompanies him into the unknown without a backward glance, leaving behind all that was once precious and familiar to her. The time for action has arrived. The objective is clear. The Bloodtooth tribe must be annihilated. Meanwhile, within the Bloodtooth tribe, all preparations are complete, and it is time to launch an assault on the alien tribe with the goal of destroying the enemy and capturing the elves. Joy erupted when the goblins were spotted, and everyone celebrated. While one of the guards reported that a guest was requesting a meeting, the stranger is a low-level goblin. The Bloodtooth tribe's chieftain surmises, feeling no fear, as he stares directly into the visitor's eyes. The visitor is Lentian, and his intelligence unsettles the leader, for he is not a mutant, yet thinks like a human. Lentian identifies himself as the leader of a different tribe, stating that his purpose is to overthrow Chief Bloody Tooth. He indifferently presents the rest of the tribe with an ultimatum: either pledge their unconditional allegiance to him or face the certain death that will soon befall them. The chief is aware that Lentian holds the elves captive, which piques his interest, as he considers his own lineage worthy of procreating with elves. A new order established under Lentian's banner would undoubtedly alter the power dynamics of this tribe. The Bloody Tooth chieftain responds with scorn, dismissing him as trash and no real threat, then grabs Ting Liang's face, poised to kill him. The chieftain believes he can easily seize the elves for himself after the battle, and his tribe clamors for the stranger's death, prompting Lentian to realize that talk is now over. He makes the first move, delivering an instantaneous strike that sends the chieftain's hand flying, causing him to scream in a mixture of pain and fury. The tribe, incensed by this act of betrayal, surges into a frenzied attack, eager for vengeance on behalf of their insulted brethren. But Ting Liang acts without a moment's pause, and with a single motion, he severs the chieftain's arm, leaving the other goblins stunned by his power and swiftness. All of this is thanks to his progress and newly acquired skills, as Lentian's army now emerges from the shadows. He gives the command to wipe out the Bloodtooth tribe, and his warriors begin to advance, encircling their foe. The collective scream of numerous goblins reverberates through the forest as the battle proceeds exactly as planned, and the enemy's resistance crumbles. The leader observes the unfolding events with unwavering confidence, knowing that even if he falls, his enemy will fall with him. The end is drawing near, and a palpable fear hangs in the air as Lentian summons Euphria, who activates the holy cell. A flare of light erupts, swallowing the battlefield and trapping the chieftain within a luminous enclosure, the magic terrifyingly pure and powerful. The leader cannot withstand the overwhelming anger and screams in frustration, having been caught in the enemy's trap from which there is no escape. Euphria presses herself against Lentian's leg, and he commends her for her performance, promising a reward for her loyalty and strength. Euphria expresses her gratitude, her face glowing with happiness at having received her master's praise. The chieftain curses him, branding him a devil, but Lentian merely smiles, already savoring the taste of his impending victory. He is poised to become a hero to his people and is ready to assume control of the Bloodtooth tribe as the Tian Mao tribe advances. Ting Liang wipes his brow, acknowledging that the subjugation required considerable effort, and the remaining members of the Bloodtooth tribe were subsequently assimilated. Loder is plunged into a state of confusion, plagued by doubts about the identity of this enigmatic goblin who is capable of such feats. Lentian places Yue in charge of the camp's care, assigning Afria to her and commanding her to follow Yue's orders. The elf assists Lentian in changing his attire, and Lentian alludes to an important meeting with a friend scheduled for that day. While fighting knights is a possibility, confronting the swordswoman is not, as it would require a goblin hero just to hold her at bay. However, this will demand both time and the formation of an alliance, making it necessary to seek the help of an ancient creature. He makes his way toward the lair where the dragon slumbers, the wind cold against him, but a fierce determination burning within. Dragon Island is situated hundreds of miles from the nearest landmass, a distance too great to be covered on foot. The most expedient method is to summon the Mistress of the Skies herself, for which Ting Liang prepares a bait of fresh animal blood. He conceals himself inside the carcass, suppressing his breathing, knowing the potent scent will mask him, even from animal senses. An hour later, a burst of flame appears in the sky, and the dragon descends, her wings eclipsing the sun. A colossal shadow sweeps over the land as the grass ignites, and the dragon seizes the carcass, ascending back into the sky. Ting Liang remains frozen inside the carcass, holding his position as the altitude rapidly increases and the clouds are left far below, the flight carrying him toward the horizon's edge. He discerns the silhouette of a rocky island, and the dragon makes its landing atop an ancient volcano. A new chapter of his destiny is about to unfold as the dragon drops the carcass onto the stone floor of its lair. Lentian remains motionless inside, feeling the reverberations as the warmth outside is replaced by the cool dampness of the cave. The thick scent of blood permeates the air, gradually oozing from the mangled flesh of the carcass. The dragon's eyes are already fixed upon him, and deep within the lair, flames dance, the vaults of the cave shaking with each breath of the monster. His armor is coated in a viscous layer of blood, and the dragon's labored breathing is clearly audible. She is a majestic creature, her body covered in black scales. Her eyes are filled with an ancient fury, and a magical energy pulsates around her as he raises his hands in a gesture of peace. The shadows cast by bones create dark, ominous silhouettes, and a tense pause hangs in the air, thick enough to break. He begins to speak, and the dragoness listens without interruption, the cave growing quiet as she waits, her attention piqued when Lentian mentions the holy swordswoman. The flame within the dragoness's eyes intensifies as she recalls the power, pain, and humiliation she endured, her anger giving way to curiosity. He presents her with a strategy involving shadowy strikes and cooperation, and the dragoness contemplates his offer, spreading her wings. Her claws grip the stone as she considers his proposal, seeing in him not just a simple goblin, but one whose eyes hold calculation instead of fear. Lentian proposes a series of diversionary raids on the city, thereby avoiding a direct confrontation with the swordswoman, his words forming a coherent and logical plan. She carefully considers the potential risks and rewards, her response to his offer taking shape in the silence before she slowly nods, signaling her agreement to the alliance. The goblin does not smile, but a glint of success shines in his eyes, for the initial step has been taken, and chaos is now imminent. The goblin's weapons pose no threat to her soldiers, so there is no risk and she agrees to the deal, surprised that a goblin could possess such intelligence. She finds Lentian appealing and expresses her desire for him to reward her, revealing that the female dragon is receptive to mating. He feels a desire to compensate her for her loyalty and diligence by attempting to help her unlock her latent abilities. Loder is anticipating rescue by the knights, convinced that remaining here will lead to his breaking, and that they must escape, though goblins have them surrounded. The only viable escape route is down the mountain, but a dragon is visible in the distance, and the prisoner is terrified of being incinerated. Suddenly, a dragon appears with Lentian on its back, and the goblins greet his arrival with great joy. They are to rest and prepare before embarking on the next phase, as the goblins welcome their master's return. The city of Guangming is on high alert, and the warrior knights are assembling with a determined resolve to organize the rescue of civilians from the ongoing disasters. The Holy Swordswoman devises a rescue strategy, while the development system for the third-generation goblins is initiated. Following a number of assaults on the city and the Bloodtooth tribe, the long-awaited progress has at last been achieved. Ifreya is dispatched for training with the expectation that in 1 month the goblins' levels will rise, with the main one reaching 50 and Ifreya reaching 45. The options presented are to continue slaying monsters, breed more goblins, or accelerate the passage of time. The choice was made to accelerate time, transitioning to the end of the month, which resulted in gained experience but only minor overall advancement. The hero, upon attaining level 50, experienced a substantial boost to his attributes, becoming significantly more powerful than he was before. Unexpectedly, a catastrophe occurs. The third-generation goblins are all stillborn. A flaw in their development has diminished the strength of the descendants, revealing that the higher the level, the more challenging it is to perpetuate the lineage. Ridicule and threats follow this failure, and Loader asserts that all attempts to breed powerful goblins are destined to be fruitless. The story concludes with Loader issuing a warning against playing games with death. It is now too late to bring back the dead, so the next course of action must be carefully considered, with the strengthening of the existing goblins becoming the new priority. Loader is handed over to the goblins to be torn limb from limb, and he screams in terror as the reality of his helplessness and imminent demise sets in. Suddenly, a dragon in heat materializes, presenting a potential opportunity to alter the current circumstances. The female dragon unexpectedly lunges at Lentien with lustful intent, unlocking a new achievement for him. The hero's level experiences a dramatic surge, with his health, strength, and defense all multiplying several times over. Are all dragons this voracious? He wonders, as he begins to grasp his own uniqueness and the possibilities that lie in his future. The dragon's blood is the essential component for further advancement, and the current plan must be seen through to completion before he can proceed. The dragon's blood is distributed among the remaining goblins, and the leader observes the situation as it develops, awaiting the outcome. That evening, gathered around the fire, the goblins celebrate the newfound strength they have gained from the dragon's blood. Their power has been augmented, and all the goblins have become more formidable, while Lentien rests on the dragon's back, knowing the legendary beast strengthens his tribe. His experience points remain low, necessitating further training, and the system unveils a shop offering new pieces of equipment. The leader of a goblin tribe cannot afford to remain passive when his people are facing a mortal threat. An elemental hand crossbow is introduced, a compact ranged weapon capable of absorbing the elements of water, fire, wind, and thunder. It also offers a strength that can endure 3 strikes from a weapon or bare hands, at the cost of 80 energy points. The process of selecting new skills and gear is now finished, and the preparations for the upcoming battle are well underway. Lentien is unfamiliar with the new weapon and wants someone to volunteer to test it. Loader is deemed a fitting test subject and will be the first to witness Lentien's power as cries for help echo through the magical forest. The dragon's mother has been frequently harassing the city, and the Holy Swordswoman appears to be ignoring the goblins, delegating the fight against them to others. Thanks to Loader, a perfect chance has arisen to exploit the situation and secure an easy and swift victory. Suddenly, the captain detects movement and spots a massive spider. While everyone dislikes these creatures, this particular spider proved to be extraordinary. It was struck by an arrow, but did not perish, and then a goblin emerged from the shadows. The expedition concluded much more rapidly than anticipated, and now all the accolades would be bestowed upon them. The boys proceeded to execute their plan, with the archer providing cover and instilling a sense of confidence that the operation would proceed without a hitch. The commander commended him for his many victories against the goblins and assured everyone that he could be trusted completely. They returned the sentiment, reminding him that they too had vanquished numerous foes, including one hero among them. In the end, they came to a resolute agreement to eliminate their adversaries permanently and irrevocably. At that moment, the knight charged at the goblin with a battle cry, vowing to kill him in a matter of seconds, and a savage fight ensued. The struggle proved to be exceptionally fierce, with blows exchanged with incredible power. But the defense held, which provided a glimmer of hope. The monster was undeniably powerful, but its isolation provided them with an advantage. Abruptly, a goblin assassin appeared from behind, escalating the threat and further complicating the engagement. The commander gave the order to scout the area and prepare a defense, and soon hordes of goblins emerged, ravenous for their prey. In a ferocious clash, the goblins secured a conclusive victory, shattering the enemy's will to fight with their raw brutality. A fierce contest over the spoils of war erupted among them, with each warrior attempting to stake their claim. However, the head of the tribe intervened, reminding them that all spoils belonged to the tribe and that there was no reason to engage in internal conflict. Ultimately, the two most powerful goblins suggested they resolve the matter through a fair duel to establish the true leader. The support from their brethren was unwavering, and they pledged to advance shoulder to shoulder, fighting as one to solidify their dominance. Laughter and a palpable fighting spirit filled the encampment as a true war loomed on the horizon. He gazed at the reflection in his sword, mentally steeling himself for the impending battle, determined to become the next chieftain. The first priority was to repel the enemies, as the heroes had returned, and this time they had brought humans with them. The goblins are in a state of agitation, but Lentian remains confident in his ability to control them. A palpable tension filled the air, as the spoils were on the verge of being distributed, but Lentian stepped in, insisting that the prisoner be handed over to him. The goblin would only consent in return for the girl, causing the tension between them to escalate. The chieftain issued a challenge to the mad goblin for a one-on-one fight, offering him a chance to demonstrate his strength and claim the title of new leader. In return, he was met with laughter and a counter-challenge, as the former head of the tribe was also prepared to fight to retain his position. This particular goblin was distinguished from the others by his loyalty and his unwavering faith in his absolute power, and the struggle for leadership was about to commence. The son, in his quest to validate his own strength, challenges his father, driven by a desire for recognition and a place of his own among the warriors. The Mad Goblin, having achieved level 50, possessed the titles of warrior, son of an elf, holder of God's blessing, and powerful demon. His strength had already climbed to an impressive 1,200 points. Yet despite this, his father questioned his ability to withstand a trial against him. The son was prepared to kill the chieftain to assert his dominance and seize the female captives as his prize. A significant number of goblins were prepared to align themselves with the new leader, but first they needed to witness a demonstration of his power. The heroes among the goblins were given a choice: either stand with the leader or face certain death. No one had anticipated that the leader would be such an unassuming individual, but fortune seemed to favor the captive. He intended to make his escape once the fighting began, banking on the significant disparity in their strength. As long as the old leader remained alive, hiding would be difficult, but several goblins had already signaled their readiness to follow the new one. This goblin Lentian was different from all the rest, having chosen a path of limitless power. No one could fathom how he had amassed such power so quickly, but his capabilities were undeniably remarkable. His weapon was of an unfamiliar type, moving too swiftly to be simply evaded, forcing his opponent to parry the strikes. The goblin shattered the fireball with an astonishing display of strength, compelling the chieftain to acknowledge his power. In the heat of the conflict, the goblin charged forward with a mighty blade, taking his enemy by surprise. However, destiny was not on his side, as his adversary proved to be imbued with a power sufficient to repel such an assault. In the end, the goblin conceded defeat, and upon witnessing Lentian's strength, they dropped to their knees, pleading for mercy and vowing never to challenge him again. The leader demonstrates clemency, vowing not to execute those who maintain their loyalty, even through challenging times. However, he resolved to keep a select few for himself indefinitely, ensuring their eternal service to him. The goblins humbly accepted their fate and swore their fealty to their new leader. The goblins, overcome with terror, pleaded for mercy, their panic and despair evident in the face of their unavoidable punishment. Their leader commanded his followers to absorb the defiant ones so they could fortify themselves and become even more powerful. Cries of allegiance to the overlord echoed throughout the area as the goblins pledged their undying servitude. Loder, observing the unfolding events, came to the chilling realization that he was facing not just a goblin, but a genuine monster. Before them stood a being of such immense power that an entire empire was afraid to even speak its name. He expressed regret that he had not been able to unleash his full potential, but he knew that waiting for salvation was a futile endeavor. Loder's hopes for the Holy Swordswoman's arrival were high, yet he understood that the outcome of this confrontation was already determined. Meanwhile, the Goblin Lord mercilessly taunted his opponents for their weakness, referring to them as pathetic scum. He confidently anticipated the Swordswoman's demise, knowing that her death would herald their ultimate victory. Loder did not bother to conceal his arrogance, issuing a warning of the impending threat and stating that the Holy Swordswoman would undoubtedly come for them after dealing with the dragon. Lentian sarcastically pointed out that the dragon would not be fighting alone, and thus he remained calm, confident in their combined invincibility. In response, Loder treated his threats with skepticism, believing his intentions were merely part of a larger game. Finally, the prisoner's humble request was voiced, to be allowed to die alongside Loder if that was to be his fate. The Lord, though with some reluctance, consented, demonstrating that even in this savage war, there was a place for acknowledging worthy adversaries. The Holy Swordswoman is disturbed by the commotion and the incoming reports. The dragon has not breached the city, but the team has returned from the battle with heavy casualties. The Knights of the Silver Blade have been nearly wiped out, with only a single wounded survivor remaining who has sustained severe injuries. It is reported that during the battle, they faced a goblin hero, a rare and formidable foe that compelled them to withdraw. This particular goblin struck them as a true abomination, a monster that demanded extreme caution. The swordswoman recognizes that the dragon attacks are becoming more frequent and that the goblins could exploit this situation to launch a surprise offensive. She understands that she cannot handle the situation alone and insists that reinforcements be dispatched to safeguard Guangming City. She plans to personally confront the goblins and the Mother of Dragons to neutralize the threat once and for all. The Holy Swordswoman is hesitant, recalling the fate of the previous team and wondering if any of them are still alive. However, her advisor strongly cautions against sending more soldiers into the fray, arguing that their own arrogance was the cause of their defeat. He introduces himself as Kazimov, the leader of the Death Knights, and declares his intention to take charge of saving the people. The Holy Swordswoman is skeptical that he can single-handedly manage a threat that everyone else deems insurmountable. But Kasimov confidently recounts a time when he fought alone against 4 Titan warriors and emerged victorious. He proclaims that even the legendary heroes of the past would no longer be a match for him. At that moment, the Lentian system activates and displays a new panel, revealing that new opportunities and resources are now available for use. The system's activation is complete, and the current storyline centers on the confrontation with Kasimov, the Reaper of Death. Following the instructions of the Swordsman Saint, he launched a surprise night attack on the tribe, inflicting significant damage. Although Kasimov was ultimately vanquished and forced into submission, the losses sustained were substantial. The choice to seize the initiative and confront him directly led to a fight to the death. In that duel, you successfully gained the upper hand, but it came at the cost of your own life. The subsequent phase will involve amassing strength and formulating a strategy for the tribe's recovery and protection. A period of great tension is approaching as Kazimov is already drawing near, and his power is truly formidable. The tales of his clashes with the Titans, powerful warriors from hostile territories, instill fear in all who hear his name. These Titans are capable of annihilating even the most powerful 5th-rank monsters, and Kasimov not only faced them, but also triumphed. It is widely understood that he wields special techniques and an incredible power capable of obliterating everything in his path. Acknowledging that a head-on confrontation would likely end in catastrophe, the most prudent course of action was to dispatch reconnaissance units. It is essential to gather extensive intelligence regarding his whereabouts, the number of soldiers at his command, and his overall fighting prowess. This approach is the sole method for adequate preparation in the formulation of a plan that offers a possibility of both survival and victory. The atmosphere grew heavier with tension and foreboding, as the forest was unnervingly devoid of any monsters, showing only the remnants of prior squads slain in combat. The air hung heavy with a sharp scent of blood, a seeming harbinger of an approaching and unavoidable danger. A sudden scream pierced the silence, It was Euphria, one of the few survivors, her voice filled with a mixture of help-seeking, despair, and fear. She explains that Loder has perished and that she managed to escape from one of the most savage goblin tribes in the vicinity. He does not pause but presses onward, confident that Euphria is resourceful enough to find her own path to safety. Euphria extends an invitation to Kazimov to travel with her further, giving her assurance that she is familiar with the route and can help him navigate past any traps. He possesses a distinctive specialization known as Desperate Knight, which grants him a combat advantage when he is isolated and without any backup. With every enemy he eliminates, his statistics receive a 30% boost, and his total strength is augmented by 20%. This characteristic transforms him into a particularly formidable combatant who is resilient, merciless, and remarkably effective when fighting alone. Kazimov proceeds onward, viewing this as a potential chance to discover allies or, at the very least, acquire crucial information for the fight ahead. With Loder finally eliminated, the way to the pinnacle of power is now clear for those who have the courage to take the next step. His self-assurance swelled, based on the assumption that the tribe would be unable to stand against a single powerful foe. However, he was suddenly caught in an ambush, and he was thrown from his horse to the forest floor, with Euphria surprisingly nearby despite her apparent departure. An unexpected blast of divine radiance disrupts the moment, making all subsequent actions completely unpredictable. Euphria launches a ferocious assault, as though carrying out her master's command, demanding that he be put to death. Seizing her from behind, the adversary reveals his sadistic nature, demonstrating that his pleasures extend beyond simply killing monsters. He has the ability to manipulate his entire surroundings, including both the living and the dead, bending their minds and bodies to his command. His words are delivered with a cold-blooded detachment, showing no fear of confronting everyone alone, and his skill with armaments is genuinely remarkable. He is a lone combatant who wields terrifying weaponry and commands potent skills that strike fear into all of his adversaries. This is the new reality in which the next phase of the struggle for dominance and existence is set to commence. The question of who will emerge victorious in this clash will be determined by destiny, with the resolution to be revealed in the next battle. The enemy's gear is of the highest quality, with a longsword forged from black iron that is a fearsome artifact on its own. Furthermore, his abilities, which include Deadly Harvest, Speed Attack, Group Attack, and Critical Strike, constitute a truly lethal combination. The circumstances are escalating to a point of genuine peril for the entire tribe. It is a strange irony that a low-ranking goblin would have the audacity to wield such a blade, almost as if it were a direct challenge to fate itself. The enemy is convinced that a mastermind is orchestrating the attack, suspecting some form of dark interference or a cleverly devised scheme. He refers to Euphria with contempt as a Portia, yet he concedes that she proved to be a rather effective little creature. He expresses his disappointment in her capabilities, having anticipated more from her, but the reality of the situation revealed the true extent of her strength and resolve. His hostility is unmistakable, as his words, "I'll tear you apart with my bare hands, and you've been waiting for a place in hell for a long time," serve as both a challenge and a dire threat. It is apparent that you are not dealing with a mere adversary, but with someone who is supremely confident in their own power and will stop at nothing to achieve victory. Despite all the challenges, the enemy was at last overcome. The head of the tribe makes his return from the hunt, his strength acknowledged by all, having once again emerged victorious without suffering a single injury. The tribe pays homage to him as if he were a deity, with even the most audacious goblins bowing their heads in a display of respectful fear. Loder beholds the corpse of a fallen warrior and is seized with horror, realizing that nothing can be done to save him now. Servants present the flesh of their defeated foes, with the chosen few eating first while the others await the leftovers. The corpses themselves have become a valuable resource, as their meat is used to strengthen the body and their blood is employed in enigmatic rituals. The tribe's geneticists carefully select the most ferocious goblins to engineer rare and grotesque subspecies. Work is proceeding at a rapid pace within the laboratory, where the genes of knights are being combined with goblin bodies to forge hideous new warriors. The cages holding the captured knights are kept under guard, as their flesh is destined to become the foundational material for future soldiers. The tribe's leader analyzes the data concerning the Saint Swordswoman, pinpointing her vulnerabilities and the number of her defenders, as she formulates a plan of attack. It was discovered that she had a mere 3 knights remaining, all of whom had already been captured by the tribe, yet he knew he would lose if he delayed his move. The leader addresses his army and declares with certainty, tomorrow the annihilation would commence. Deep within the dense woods, the knight discovered, with a sense of alarm and dread, the gnarled remains of a human body, a remnant of a previous tragedy. The holy swordswoman gazes upon Kasimov's body, noting that the knight's coat of arms is now stained with blood and rendered powerless. A sudden flash of insight strikes her. This is not a coincidence, for the dragons and goblins are collaborating. Wang Ming is likely caught in a trap, prompting an immediate order for all combat units to mobilize and find allies. The knights mounted their steeds, and the clatter of their hooves on the stones resounded loudly, shattering the profound silence. One captain voiced his skepticism, pointing out that the journey to Enda would be excessively long. He suggested that perhaps he should proceed alone, while the others returned to defend the city. The witch sharply interjects, explaining that this is a survival tactic. Even if they are ambushed, it is crucial that someone survives to deliver the news. However, the problem is that the knights are currently struggling to fend off both the dragons and the goblins simultaneously. A voice suddenly calls out, halting their advance, as everyone freezes. For before them lies a collapsed bridge with its remains submerged in the churning river below. Perhaps it's a trap, one of the warriors exclaims, peering into the shadowy depths of the forest, while the commander is tense, aware that an ambush might await them on the alternate route. He scowls at the sight of the destroyed bridge, acknowledging that it is still the most secure path forward. He gives the command to fell the trees, intending to construct a new bridge immediately, and the whistle of sword blades fills the air as trees fall to the ground one by one. By dusk, a new bridge had been erected, but the encroaching darkness seemed to consume the forest, rendering the path even more treacherous. They crossed the precarious structure one at a time, each feeling the oppressive weight of the gathering darkness around them. The knight scans the darkness and spots a silhouette materializing in the sky, revealing wings, flames, and a fearsome roar, confirming it is a dragon. A goblin is perched on the dragon's back, a sinister grin on its face in the gloom, as it mockingly questions if they truly intend to build a bridge in this very spot. The alternate route had seemed suspiciously quiet, and everyone had feared that an ambush was concealed right there in the shadows of the trees. The knight is in a state of shock, realizing the bridge was destroyed intentionally, and the dragon is already drawing a breath, its mouth filling with flames that rush toward the crossing. The bridge instantly ignites, consumed by intense heat and smoke, causing the knights to retreat in a state of panic. The forest suddenly springs to life as armed goblins emerge from the undergrowth, and the knights know they must stand their ground for the sake of Guangming. One of the knights, Beth, volunteers to break through and deliver a report, while the others vow to delay the enemy at all costs. Goblins and knights engage in a brutal and bloody conflict as the battle commences, with the holy swordswoman anticipated as their last hope in this uneven fight. The goblins' actions appeared to be deliberately measured and strategic. The release of the rider seemed far too simple, almost like it was designed as a lure in a trap. Suspicions mounted that the enemy's goal was to draw out the main defender, as her departure would make the city's loss almost certain. The knights charged toward their objective, attempting to halt the enemy, but their attacks lost all potency against the new wielder of the Black Blade. The knights recognized that their foe was now in possession of the fallen Kasimov's blade, as Lentian dismounted from the dragon, perfectly executing the final phase of the trap. The goblins were commanded to eliminate the squad before the saint could arrive, and Lentian led the charge, shattering the defenders' ranks. A combination of exhaustion, fear, and despair settled upon the last of the fighters, their strikes dying out as if they were hitting an impenetrable wall of armor. Lentian issued the command to abandon the field before the enemy's arrival, and the goblins melted back into the shadows, leaving no evidence of their presence. Only the bodies of the fallen and their fading groans were left on the battlefield as a new phase of the siege began under the cover of fire and darkness. The holy swordswoman arrived far too late, finding the battlefield strewn with bones. The other knights stood nearby, paralyzed with horror at the sheer magnitude of the tragedy. The captain fell to his knees before the dead, swearing an oath to avenge every last one who had died with a sword in hand until his own end. The dragon's fire had only incinerated a portion of the area, as the goblins had consumed the rest, leaving the bodies mutilated and with only scraps of humanity remaining. The saint deduced that the goblins and dragons were collaborating, and one of the knights confirmed this by reporting he had seen a goblin riding a dragon. The suspicions were now confirmed. This was their leader, the mastermind of the attack, who had ordered the bridge to be burned and had led the detachment into a trap. The saint's hand tightened on the hilt of her sword, her being filled with anger and fury as she realized this was all part of a well-orchestrated diversion. Suddenly, a scout's scream rang out, announcing that the city of Guangming was under attack, and a wave of alarm spread through the knights without exception. Desperation mingled with a fierce resolve to return and protect the city, as they understood the dragon's attacks had been a distraction to allow the enemy to strike at the very heart of their home. The saint recognized that this was not a random event, but a calculated strategy, and knowing there was no time to spare, the army hastily began its return journey. A column of black smoke was already visible on the horizon, a clear sign of disaster, and upon her return to Guangming, the swordswoman was met with nothing but ashes and death. The remnants of the city smoldered, and the streets were littered with the lifeless bodies of its inhabitants, causing her to kneel in silent disbelief. From the debris, a child's cry emerged, a young boy sobbing over the body of his father, who then screamed and pushed her away. The accusations were hurled loudly as the people held her responsible for the tragedy that had occurred, and a mother who had lost her daughter did not restrain her anger or her tears. The crowd swarmed around her, directing their collective hatred at her, and the words, "We don't need you," cut deeper than any physical blade. The swordswoman stood isolated, at a loss for how to respond, and a profound silence descended upon the devastated city. At the same time, in the distance, the dragoness observed the outcome with a sense of satisfaction. Lentian had executed the mission flawlessly, emerging from the battle without a single blow landed on him and completely unscathed. Cunning and the element of surprise had proven more effective than swords and shields, and it had all begun with a single meeting, with Lentian being the pivotal point. At the Tian Mao tribe's camp, the leader returned from his hunt, and the goblins reported the success of their attack. Several girls had been captured and were shown mercy, their lives spared on the condition that they submit. They had succeeded in removing the cell from the city, along with the gold, granting them the resources and the opportunity to start anew, while Lentian gained new powers. The Holy Swordswoman was feeling immense pressure as the dragons increased the frequency of their flights over the island, escalating the psychological strain. Lentian and the Mother of Dragons formulated their next plans, deciding to continue using the dragons to apply pressure on the saint. In exchange, Lentian pledged his support, and a sense of mutual trust began to form between them as they prepared for the upcoming challenges. The dragon seized Lentian in a powerful grip, pinning him to the ground as she demanded his acknowledgement and respect. Lentian scoffed at her words, not yet believing in his own strength, but the dragon perceived in him the potential of a ruler and great power. She elaborated that dragons instinctively align with the strongest individuals, choosing those who have the capacity to alter the course of history itself. Her objective is to be near a powerful being in order to produce formidable offspring. Lentian contemplated a new path forward, one filled with immense power, lethal trials, and overwhelming strength. His new characteristics were displayed: health plus 1900, strength plus 600, and defense plus 1400. Meanwhile, the dragon was sleeping soundly, and he had no desire to disturb her. Lentian started his journey home, sensing potential complications if the Mother of Dragons wished to keep him by her side. The Mother of Dragons sees in him the potential to usher in a new era for goblins, one that could potentially reshape their future entirely. Lentian permitted the elves to depart, taking into account their growth, and he chose to trust them to decide whether to follow him. The Mother of Dragons acknowledged Lentian as a unique goblin and resolved to remain with him. Kasana also knelt before Lentian, signifying her own devotion to him. They were aware that the attacks on the elves would cease if they chose to stay. The elves made the decision to remain by his side, and the Mother of Dragons became one of his loyal subordinates. They were no longer captives, but were now protected and faithful allies. The Holy Swordswoman has been defeated, and the threat of invasions has been eliminated, allowing the hero army to begin its development in earnest. The goblin expresses his indignation at the small number of humans available for him, and the elves propose their help with artificial insemination. Suddenly, one of the goblins died, and Lentian was shocked by this unexpected event, the cause of which remained a mystery. A sense of calm had prevailed until he suddenly lost his sanity and perished, leaving behind numerous unanswered questions. Then, just as suddenly, the goblin was resurrected, reaching level 50 and acquiring the Mad Warrior class. His new titles were impressive: revived, transformed, distorted, and blessed by God. Thanks to the Mother of Dragons, he had obtained powerful new characteristics, and the leader was pleased that the goblin had not only survived, but had also grown stronger. Now there is an opportunity to concentrate on raising a new generation that is prepared for the approaching storm. 3 months have now passed in Guangming City, and it has been a long time since the Saint has made any moves. A spirited debate was taking place in the tavern, centered on how the goblins had managed to overcome the best warriors. The commander of the brave squad, His Highness Siddle, made an unexpected entrance, leaving everyone in the room in a state of awe. After extensive training and breeding efforts, 150 goblin heroes were born across 3 generations. The royal family has posted a reward of 300 gold coins, and Siddle is assembling a team of brave warriors to destroy your tribe. The enemies are of diamond and epic rank, necessitating careful preparation, and the mission offers 10 points with a reward of health multiplied by 10. A diamond-ranked traveler serves as a mentor to other goblins, while an epic-ranked traveler is even more powerful than the Sword Saint. A new challenge is on the horizon, as the elf has reported that the forest's resources are dwindling, and a new generation of goblins has now matured. The Iron People's base is situated nearby, offering a potential source for new equipment, but their training is falling behind due to the resource shortage. The situation in Guangming has become tense, and it is now time to relocate to a new home that must be well defended. Lentian gave the order to prepare for the move immediately, a command that surprised the elves, but they complied without question. A waterfall, rocky mountains, and a cave presented the perfect location for a new lair, and Lentian ordered it to be fortified so the children could grow up in safety. The goblins commenced the tasks of clearing and fortifying the area, and this new place became their home, with a celebration held where they swore complete loyalty to their leader. The tribe has successfully relocated, and it is now time to scout Guangming City, as the system requires a first-hand assessment of the situation before a new plan can be formulated. The tavern patrons are discussing Scythe, who typically only hunts high-level monsters. He has decided to confront the goblins in honor of his brother Loder, who fell in battle, and for the reward promised by the capital. It is rumored that the goblins are worth 1,000 gold pieces, and Wizard Gru, leader of the diamond-level Grey Hats, has also arrived. He is motivated by the money and is prepared to kill without discrimination. And it is said that the cold-blooded Lucilina is also involved this time. The tavern abruptly fell quiet and still, with everyone trying to avoid making any noise that might attract his attention and potential wrath. The wandering brave man had not come for the goblins, but rather to slay the dragon and achieve the rank of an epic adventurer. Goblins should not be taken lightly, as their mutations render them exceptionally dangerous. The veteran warrior, having lived for a century, understands that goblins pose a threat to all epic peoples. Money is the sole motivation for many who have come here, as the goblins have already claimed the lives of numerous allies. They have proven impossible to eradicate over thousands of years, making caution the most important principle. The old man is confident that he and His Highness will successfully complete their task, and is prepared to distribute the rewards after their victory. The team makes the decision to traverse the forest, a strategy that will allow them to act decisively and catch their enemy off guard. The young man is overly cautious and wishes to scout the area before proceeding. Among their number is an enigmatic goblin slayer who conceals his true identity. His voice had a false quality, yet in his presence, no one doubted his genuine strength. He had never sustained any significant injuries and had single-handedly killed more than 1,000 goblins. The Goblin Slayer declined to join their group and demanded that they clear a path for him. His audacity prompted warnings about the potential repercussions, as his behavior, despite his strength, was beginning to irritate those around him. Everyone observed him with a keen interest, uncertain of what to expect, as his actions had the potential to alter the entire outcome of the battle. Lentian monitored the unfolding events from a mountaintop, employing a piercing vision that could penetrate both space and darkness. He identified a knight, a level 65 Goblin Slayer, a man with no class, a concealed identity, and the title of alcohol-carrying brother. His characteristics fluctuated between 1,000 and 3,000, and the system offered no clear solutions for dealing with him. On the battlefield was Sittel himself, a horseman of royal lineage with a combat strength of 1,300. Also present was Gru, a great mage with a power level of 1,400, and despite their high diamond rank, no significant problems were anticipated from them. However, special attention needed to be paid to the Goblin Slayer, as his presence could change everything in an instant. In the former settlement of the Tianmao tribe, the defenders observed something peculiar, noting that such a large settlement should have been located much sooner. They discovered numerous signs of recent battles along their path, which confirmed that the tribe was in the vicinity. The old man found a strange strand of hair and upon sniffing it, identified it as elven hair, which gave rise to some alarming suspicions. Suspicions began to form that the elves might have assisted the goblins in their escape, a notion that seemed utterly impossible. A special type of butterfly, which is sensitive to the scent of elves, indicated the direction they should take, offering a potential way to locate the goblins. The butterfly appeared to be heading toward the river, which raised the question of whether the goblins could have managed to cross it. The old man proposed that they should simply wait for the Goblin Slayer to complete his task. All of this seemed superfluous as one of the goblins was spotted in the distance, indicating that the threat was both real and immediate. They initiated a pursuit, and Lentian was prepared, as his baited trap had functioned perfectly. The knight expressed his surprise and commented, with a hint of sarcasm, that the surrounding area was quite beautiful. The laughter seemed out of place, and it was then revealed that the pursuer was a knight, who also happened to be a girl. She unexpectedly entered the water to bathe, an action that seemed incredibly strange given the dangerous, intense circumstances. The Goblin Slayer was indeed a girl, but it was clear she was not of the human race, and her power was exceptionally prominent. She appeared to be intentionally drawing attention to herself, as if attempting to seduce someone, leading to the suspicion that she might have detected the ambush. The dragon ascended into the sky, but Lentian chose not to act hastily, needing to first address the other enemies. The girl looked upward, her gaze a clear challenge, and she beckoned him to approach, creating a sense of perilous allure. The prince halted and issued a warning about a possible encirclement as flaming arrows began to rain down around them. The magician conjured a protective shield and unleashed a potent stream of energy from his orb, the impact of which was felt even by him. The old man was formidable, but the battle raged on, and the goblins launched their offensive, displaying the skills of seasoned heroes. They employed a fireball technique while enveloped in a protective field, which rendered them almost impervious to harm. One of the goblins managed to survive the devastating assault, and despite their best efforts, they were unable to completely destroy it. Enemies had them surrounded on all sides, and it was a surprising sight to see the goblins outfitted with modern equipment. Sittel was instructed to assume a central role in the battle, and the mage placed his complete trust in him. As the battle continued, the mage unleashed a variety of magical attacks, including ice shards, sand grips, and punitive rains. The knight responded to the call for aid and joined the fray, while the prince urged everyone not to be afraid and to hold the ground. The priesthood invoked the highest tier of magic, the Holy Light, summoning its maximum power to obliterate the evil souls. The mage announced his intention to summon a snowstorm to help encircle and protect the injured, thereby restoring their strength. The primary objective remained the same: to completely and permanently annihilate all enemies without any regret or mercy. The diamond-ranked travelers proved to be significantly more clever and coordinated than had been anticipated. If they had managed to reach the other goblin tribes, those tribes would have been utterly defenseless against them. However, it was their misfortune that the enemies had come specifically for them. The mutant charged into the fight, which elicited a malicious laugh from the girl in the water, who was clearly delighted by the goblin's strength. The mighty mage was captured by the grotesque mutant, and the young prince was paralyzed with fear, unable to even move. The mage desperately screamed for Sithla's help while the prince panicked, viewing these goblins as actual demons. The prince launched an attack, shouting that the goblins were even using elven arrows, a surprising and dangerous development. He cried out to the goblin slayer for assistance when the goblins swarmed him, and the slayer came to his aid. The prince's gratitude was expressed with sincerity, but the knight warned him to maintain his distance. A sense of unease pervaded the air, as this goblin tribe was clearly unusual and dangerous, and their leader was lurking somewhere nearby. The knight commented with a smirk that the more goblins there were, the better it was for him. The goblin held the mage in a tight grip, and Lentian observed the situation closely, attempting to understand the full scope of what was happening. The knight identified the goblin as their leader, though he sarcastically noted that it was hard to tell from his appearance. The goblins let out a war cry and charged forward, but the knight confidently dispersed them as if they were nothing more than balloons. Leitan was astounded by the skills of the girl, whose rank was considered to be A, and he began to suspect that she possessed magical abilities. During the battle, the girl entered a state of frenzy, and the goblins began to mutate, transforming into even more dangerous creatures. The knight delivered a powerful blow, but his body suddenly seemed to become stuck, which greatly surprised the fighter, as he was now covered in goblin blood. Lentian concluded that they could not win a direct confrontation and gave the command to fall back. He ordered them to form a circle and engage from a distance to gradually wear down the enemy. He mused that the girl possessed impressive skills and could be a valuable asset for future breeding efforts. The knight, realizing that the goblin was in control of the dragons, was determined not to lose this fight and prepared for her next move. The knight relentlessly cut down the advancing goblins who attacked without pause. Yet she fought on without showing any signs of fatigue. Thrusting her sword into the earth, she took a brief respite, and Lentian mentally calculated how much longer she could hold out. Removing her helmet, she revealed her beauty, which captivated the goblins, many of whom were utterly enchanted by her. Suddenly, she plunged her hand into the mage's chest, ripped out his heart, and began to devour it with a ravenous hunger. Lentian anxiously instructed his allies to keep a close watch on her and to remain on their guard. The knight did not pause and resumed her assault on the goblins, systematically killing them, one after another. When an enraged goblin charged at her, she swiftly impaled him on her sword, sending him flying with the force of her blow. Everyone around her was left to wonder about her true identity, as she remained invincible even against the goblin's absorption ability. Lentian understood that in this dire situation, it was crucial to find a way to minimize their casualties. Lentian commanded the goblins to retreat, and Ephria was instructed to follow him. The knight acknowledged his intelligence and cunning, admitting it had been a long time since she had encountered such a clever goblin. She attempted to persuade him to come to her, promising to spare the lives of the others, but Lentian remained skeptical. In response to his doubts, the knight removed her armor and weapons, demonstrating her readiness for an open discussion. Lentian, deep in thought, leaped down from the dragon, and she admitted that he had surpassed her expectations. Questions about whether her previous promises would be honored began to surface, but as time passed, no action was taken. However, the knight assured him that she would honor her word, provided that Lentian could satisfy her, as she was eager to hunt and kill strong goblins. A complex game began to unfold between them, one where the stakes were incredibly high and trust was as valuable as gold. Despite his goblin-like appearance, Lentian demonstrated the wisdom of a lord, a quality that she found particularly exciting. He felt a sense of being deceived, realizing he had fallen for her ploys, and he turned away in frustration. The nearby goblins under her control averted their gazes, not daring to witness what was about to happen. She laughed and embraced him from behind, reassuring him that she had no intention of killing him, but wished to enjoy his company and see what kind of creature he would become. Then, she climbed on top of him and kissed him, as if to ask whether this was all real. The prince remained hidden in the dense foliage, trying to stay silent as he anxiously observed the events on the battlefield. His astonishment was boundless, as the goblin slayer had not only turned out to be a girl, but was now also in the company of a goblin. Suddenly, a goblin materialized from behind, and the prince turned too late, letting out a desperate and piercing scream of horror. The goblins busily gathered the bodies of the deceased, reveling in their plentiful spoils, and looking forward to a feast after the brutal conflict. Lentian issued a warning about the risks involved if anyone were to follow him into the goblin lair. The girl responded that everything hinged on the strength of the one who wished to follow. He insisted that she reveal her identity and the nature of her power, so he could understand how she was able to control his subordinates. She then revealed that she was a descendant of the Goblin King, and her future now depended on the veracity of her claim. The Goblin leader was astounded by the girl's revelation and greatly surprised by this turn of events. She explained that, as a descendant of the Goblin King, her human-like appearance was due to her human mother. She had been raised by goblins who had abused her mother, and she had managed to survive despite the challenges of goblin reproduction. About a decade ago, armed with a knife, she embarked on a campaign to exterminate goblins, drinking their blood, and eventually becoming their ruler. She had subjugated all the goblins in the dungeon and explained that the power of her royal blood granted her control over them. She had imbued her weapon with their blood, making the touch of her blade fatal to any goblin, and if they offered no resistance, she could seize control of them. She declared that she was a goblin slayer and that she despised them, viewing it not as a job but as a form of entertainment. He remarked that she seemed to have been born specifically for the purpose of containing and destroying goblins. He recognized that if she were to become his adversary, it would pose a significant problem, and noting their similarities, he invited her to join him. The girl considered his offer, sensing that Lentian was afraid of her and had planned to take control of him, but she realized this would no longer be necessary. The knight decided to return to the city to create a diversion and proclaim that Lentian was now hers and that she would protect her own. Lentian is a level 55 goblin with no class, holding the titles of Blasphemer, Creator of New Species, and Future Ruler. He noted that the girl had provided him with a significant number of points, a feat worthy of a descendant of the Goblin King. Meanwhile, Brother Loader, despite his sickly appearance, was still alive, though his reputation had been severely damaged. With a sarcastic grin, the prince commented to his brother that not even the saint had come to his rescue, subtly mocking his weakness. Loader retorted by drawing attention to the boiling pot that had been prepared for his brother. The next moment, a goblin hoisted the prince into the air, and in a desperate attempt to save himself, he offered numerous girls in exchange for his freedom. Loader, whom his brother had nicknamed Dog, suddenly intervened, declaring that if the prince were released, he would help make the goblins stronger. The prince, regretting his words, attempted to apologize, but Lentian was not someone who easily accepted such conditions. Lentian proposed severing the prince's leg and then letting him go, so he could carry the news that Loader was still alive. This would prompt the prince's family to send reinforcements, which could then be destroyed and absorbed. The prince was left stunned by this abrupt turn of events, while Loader, consumed with rage, vowed to kill all of his enemies. However, the elf interjected with a warning that if the prince were to be released, the goblin's location would be compromised. Lentian maintained his composure, his gaze confidently fixed on the distance, showing no doubt in his decisions. A tavern on the opposite side of town was in a state of commotion, with one of the patrons shouting as if sensing impending trouble. The bartender attempted to quell the rising panic, but then overheard the name Saitel, and according to an eyewitness, he had returned to the city, missing a leg and barely clinging to life. A moment later, a wave of alarm swept through the hall, as no one could believe that two groups of fighters had failed, with only a single survivor remaining. A heavy silence descended upon the room, with all conversation ceasing as everyone sensed that a storm was on the verge of breaking. At that precise moment, the tavern doors swung open, and a knight walked in, drawing the attention of everyone present. Those in the tavern began to whisper among themselves, recalling her involvement in the recent battle. When questioned about the goblins, she stated concisely that she had eliminated all of them, regardless of their diversity or numbers. The tavern guests were frozen in astonishment, which was soon followed by cries of admiration, as her feat seemed impossible. The victory had been secured, but the enemy had proven to be far more formidable than anyone had anticipated. A scream echoed through the tavern as shadows in the form of dozens of bats swarmed into the building. People recoiled in fear, some falling from their benches while others reached for their weapons. Their entrance seemed too orchestrated, as if it were a meticulously staged performance. It soon became clear that these were mercenary killers who utilized magical transformations for transportation. One of them, addressing the Goblin Slayer, suggested that if there were truly that many goblins, then their lair must have been discovered. The Goblin Slayer responded that she had not located the lair, but had simply eliminated those she encountered along her path. She added casually that her companion would likely handle the rest of them. The mercenaries, still in their bat forms, offered to undertake the task of finding the lair in exchange for future cooperation. However, the knight declined their offer, stating that she disliked operating at night and was not accustomed to working as part of a team. Upon hearing this, one of the mercenaries remarked with a smirk that in that case, the entire reward would belong to them. The alliance failed to materialize, setting the stage not only for future battles with goblins, but also for a struggle over influence and rewards. The killer bat systematically searched the dark forest, which was illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. One of the scouts informed the captain that there was no indication of a large army's presence in the vicinity. However, the scent of blood abruptly vanished at the cave's entrance, as if it had been deliberately concealed by someone. The team proceeded cautiously into the cave, unsurprised by its presence, as it was a logical location for a goblin lair. Some began to express doubts, as the number of opponents appeared to be negligible, consisting of only one mutant and a few ordinary goblins. However, based on the Goblin Slayer's assessment, the lair belonged to an average-sized tribe, albeit one with numerous and dangerous members. The bats launched their attack with the intention of draining the blood of every goblin within the cave. However, their plan quickly went awry as flames suddenly erupted above their heads. Torrents of fire rained down upon them from the cave's ceiling, engulfing the bodies of the attackers. The bats plummeted to the ground, screaming in agony as they were consumed by the living fire, and the air became thick with the smell of burning flesh. They could not believe what they were seeing. A holy nun stood in the heart of the goblin lair, surrounded by sacred flames. Her presence there was impossible and unbelievable, yet it was real, and it changed the entire situation. Torches ignited along the stone walls of the cave, casting an ominous orange glow that amplified the sense of danger. In the dim light, the silhouettes of goblins began to take shape, with dozens, then hundreds of eyes glowing like those of predators in the dark. The killer bats realized they had walked into a trap, with no path for retreat and death as the only way forward. Lentian emerged from the ranks of the goblins, his voice laced with cold mockery. He gestured toward the intruders, as if they were prey that had naively wandered into the jaws of a monster, calling them vampires. His comments about their feast and their courage sounded more like a death sentence than a simple reproach, and the bats felt the full weight of their miscalculation. Realizing they had been exposed, they reverted to their true forms, and female figures of demonic beauty stepped forward. Their bodies radiated a chilling and deadly grace, and one of them was identified as Lilith, a level 61 vampire. She had no class, but possessed titles that inspired terror: the Immortal Countess and the Curse of the Gods. Lentian quickly evaluated the threat, noting their level, strength, and aura, all of which indicated that the impending fight would be a difficult one. However, thanks to the system, which had forewarned him of a potential visit from mercenary killers, he had been able to prepare. His composure was neither accidental nor for show. He was thoroughly prepared for the battle to come, and everyone was aware of it. The goblins began to glow with a golden light, as if a divine flame had ignited within each of them. The vampires, accustomed to the dark, began to writhe in agony, their bodies unable to endure the sanctity that now filled the cave. Some of them collapsed to their knees, consumed by the light that was like a poison to their kind. Lentian, observing the scene, understood that the advantage was now on his side, and he had no intention of wasting his energy on a pointless slaughter. He raised his hand, halting his subordinates, and the goblins froze in place like statues, though their divine light remained. He was aware that his enemy, though mortally dangerous, had come, not for revenge, but for profit. They also required a reward, but the question remained, why would immortals who sustain themselves on blood have any need for money? The answer was clear. The Holy Church and the Holy Swordswoman had imposed a prohibition on bloody hunts. Vampires were now forced to purchase blood through legal channels to ensure their survival, making money essential to their existence. He perceived an opportunity in this situation, realizing that if he could forge an alliance, he would gain exceptionally powerful allies. Moreover, Collaborating with the vampires could open up new avenues for the development of the goblin race. The idea of strengthening himself by adapting the abilities of others had already crossed his mind. Lentian stepped forward and proposed a collaboration, and as he did, the goblins extinguished their light, plunging the cave back into darkness. Their leader, Lilith, understood that the blood of goblins would not be sufficient to satisfy them. Lentian remained composed, knowing he was dealing not with mindless beasts, but with intelligent and strategic creatures. He offered them a different proposition, an alternative to senseless acts of violence. There were legends of creatures that had replaced their thirst for blood with other methods of energy saturation, such as succubi. This was achieved through rituals, special feelings, deep connections, and even physical contact between the participants. Lentian's words were met with surprise, and the vampires exchanged glances, a flicker of interest appearing in their eyes. The silence that followed was prolonged, but no longer felt threatening, as the outline of a potential alliance slowly and cautiously began to take shape in the air. There was an abundance of ghoul-like creatures with similar power in these lands. If the union proved successful, the vampires would no longer have to endure their constant thirst. Lentian's proposal seemed audacious, yet at the same time, it stirred a strange sense of hope within them. One of the girls reminded the group that they held the title of Countess, and that their own count was still under a seal. However, the response was one of sacrifice, as too many of their sisters had been lost over the preceding centuries. The hope that their suffering could finally come to an end served as a powerful motivation for them to act. They closed their eyes, immersing themselves in the sensation of a new source of power, and the reaction was unexpected. Their bodies were suffused with an energy that was similar to what only fresh blood had provided them before. It was different, but it was effective. The excitement mounted, and an increasing number of vampires expressed their eagerness to try this new method. Leah rushed to offer her assistance, attempting to stabilize the unfolding situation. The elf approached Lentian and observed that he was barely able to remain on his feet, as the vampire's greed had nearly drained him to the point of exhaustion. She commented with concern that their hunger had driven these creatures to the brink of insanity. The vampires accepted the goblin's offer and inquired about what they desired in return. He pointed out that the cave remains dark throughout the year, making it a perfect habitat for vampires. In exchange, their only obligation was to guard the cave against any outsiders, a condition the vampire approved before she and her kind soon departed. In Guangming, all contact with the mercenaries had been lost, and the travelers were now certain that the attempt had once again ended in failure. The tavern was filled with cries of cowards and losers, as the diamond-ranked travelers were blamed for the defeat. The atmosphere was thick with tension and frustration, and at that moment, the Holy Swordswoman entered the tavern. She was greeted with a warm smile and reminded of how fortunate it was that she had recovered from the events that had nearly claimed her life. A few minutes later, a plan of action was under discussion, with the Holy Swordswoman intending to go to the dragon's lair alone. The remaining knights were to concentrate their efforts on combating the goblins. Despite having only people of ordinary rank at their disposal, there was a sense of confidence that they would be able to handle the task. One of the fighters, a diamond-ranked marksman named Allison, expressed his wish to assist the Holy Swordswoman on her mission. The Swordswoman delegated the responsibility for the operation against the goblins to him, distributing the duties among the squad members. The enigmatic island of dragons could only be accessed by sea, requiring a ship in favorable weather conditions. Having learned of the traveler's ability to control objects, she offered to help him, an offer he perceived as a great honor. He mentally savored the anticipated reward, the epic rank of traveler that he believed would soon be his. The dragons circled high above the island, patrolling the skies, while the mother of dragons sat near her nest, diligently guarding her egg. She was taken aback by the current events, not having expected the swordswoman to recover so quickly. Cradling the egg, the mother of dragons thought of its father, an unusual goblin, and decided it was time to resolve the issue with the swordswoman once and for all. She transformed into her dragon form, just as the swordswoman was finishing chopping several other dragons to pieces. She then directed her attention to the mother of the amethyst dragons, asking how much longer she intended to bother them with her ambushes. The mother of dragons retorted that she would not tolerate being given orders, and reminded the swordswoman of her attempts to destroy her people. For this, she intended to kill the swordswoman, and a ferocious battle ensued, in which the dragon proved to be incredibly strong. The frightened guard was on the verge of retreating, but the swordswoman grabbed him and pulled him back into the fight, demanding that he stay out of her way. Purple shards of rock shot out from the dragon's mouth, nearly striking the guard, who recoiled in fear. The swordswoman activated her absolute strength skill and swiftly launched an attack, striking directly at the dragon's face. An explosion of an iron storm thundered across the rocks, shaking the very air and leaving a trail of fire and destruction in its wake. At that moment, the egg cracked open, and a baby dragon emerged, immediately taking to the sky. The swordswoman battled the purple dragon, aiming for its head but missing her mark and only managing to strike its eye. The enraged dragoness fought back with desperation, refusing to yield even as her strength began to wane. At that moment, the green dragon flew in to aid the mother, shielding the child and urging it to flee to a safe location. The swordswoman severed her head, and she died instantly, while the small dragon flew away, sobbing. The guard attempted an attack but was himself injured by a blast of green flame. The flames burned his face severely, and he quickly moved away, attempting to douse the burns with a healing potion. The swordswoman decided to spare the fleeing dragonette and redirect her focus to the main threat, the goblin that was looming over the city of Guangming. She was resolute in her intention to kill him with her own hands, though the swordswoman's saint noted that her magic had been weakened due to her battle with the dragons. The small dragon wept bitterly over its mother's body, desperately trying to save her. He attempted to carry her away, but his strength was failing, and he ultimately made the difficult choice to absorb his mother to preserve her power. Upon reaching the dragon's lair with his mother's head in his hands, the dragonette was immediately confronted by another dragon. The ruler was introduced, and the red dragon identified the head as belonging to Phoebos, the fire mother of dragons, which led to a tense exchange. The lord of the demon's lair listened with skepticism to the dragonette's story of his origins. He detected traces of divine power on Phoebos's body, which pointed to the intervention of a woman, the sword saint. And the other dragons looked down on the fact that the child was half goblin, viewing it as a disgrace to their entire race. Then, one of the dragons requested permission to destroy the dragonette, referring to him as a runt. The red dragon explained that the dragonette was a descendant of the true ancient dragon lord, and that there were no other dragons of his kind left. This heritage, being both draconic and goblin, makes his acceptance a complex issue. To save his mother, the child must first survive a battle with the dragon standing beside him. The dragon opened its mouth, and the green dragon flew directly into it, causing the larger dragon to cry for help as it felt it was about to explode. The red dragon stated firmly that this was the master's decision and that the child must save himself, as there was no point in expecting assistance. Suddenly, he erupted from the dragon's mouth with incredible speed, soaring into the sky, having survived and passed the trial, thus emerging victorious. The red dragon then provided instructions. To resurrect his mother, he must take the head of Phoebos. By combining it with the roots of a dead tree, he could create a tree dragon, which was the only method that could aid in his mother's revival. Meanwhile, Lentien had activated the system to accelerate the process of developing and enhancing his powers. Virtual indicators began to climb rapidly, infusing him with energy and unlocking new avenues for achieving his goals. The battle's outcome was successful, thanks to the clever exploitation of the cave's terrain features. After consuming more than 100 corpses, the goblins had finally reached level 50 and completed their evolution. The first to evolve was the furious goblin, specializing in devouring and raging. The more it consumes, the more health it acquires, transforming it into a veritable living fortress. The second to evolve was the goblin giant, whose skill, Hammer Frenzy, turns it into a destructive force on the battlefield. The third was the dark goblin, whose unique skill, Blade Master, makes him a swift and deadly assassin. These three evolved warriors have now become the cornerstone of the Goblin clan, fully prepared for new battles and conquests. The vampire, who had consumed a significant quantity of blood, confessed to dispatching her agents to keep the swordswoman saint under surveillance. Through her spies, she discovered that the swordswoman had promptly departed from Guangming, following the demise of hundreds of travelers. Preparations are currently underway to summon legendary hunters for the purpose of confronting Lentien. He is facing a significant peril as the Holy Swordswoman's new associates could very well be elite combatants from her former squad. Lentian was planning to get some fresh air within the city, knowing the Swordswoman had opportunely exited its boundaries. Suddenly, a goblin approached him at a run and swiftly delivered the news of an impending squad of his kind, which induced a state of alarm and tension. They were advancing directly toward the cave, fully intending to launch an assault and seize control of the enemy's territory. There were no other tribes located within a 50-kilometer radius, making it uncertain if these goblins were specifically the original owners of the cave. The goblins scaled the vertical cliff face, using ledges for handholds, pushing through exhaustion and pain to achieve their objective. One figure stood out among them, a wild goblin with no designated class but bearing the title of Beastmaster. He had been endowed with the power of the Beast Lords and the blessing of a glorified god, possessing the strength of a hero. Lentian acknowledged that he had never before met such powerful goblins and was unsure of which tribe they belonged to. His strength was remarkable, suggesting he could only hold a commander's rank, a fact substantiated by his divine blessing and heroic power. Lentian gave the command to get ready for a fight, stressing the need to first take out the escort detachment, as the warriors accompanying the hero were of a similar strength. The detachment had already made it to the river, and despite the strong current, they showed no signs of fatigue, while the air was thick with the heavy odor of blood. One of the goblins remarked with surprise on the lack of the usual smell that typically pervaded such locations. However, the chief conjectured that a large amount of food must be stockpiled in the cave, and that a satisfying snack would soon be theirs. The warriors began to let their guard down, anticipating a brief period of rest, but the attack was launched without any warning. Panic erupted as the squad was taken completely by surprise, with no one having anticipated an assault. The goblins surged forward to protect their chief, prepared to offer a formidable resistance to their assailants. But upon facing the mutated adversary, they faltered, and the warriors started to fall back, unable to withstand the overwhelming force of the unequal battle. Their leader was overcome with rage at the sight of the cowardly traitors who had deserted him. The opponents began to give chase to the terrified night visitors, and an increasing number of the retreating defectors were pierced through. One of the goblins, after assessing the dire situation, attempted to flee in order to report that their lair had been overtaken. Crossbow bolts pursued him, and the area was filled with the clang of metal and the groans of the injured. The situation was rapidly deteriorating to a critical point. They stood no chance. Their leader had been captured, and the other goblins were dead. The wild goblin was gravely injured, his body progressively weakening from the destructive effects of the poison that had entered his system. He glared at Lentian with intense hatred, unable to believe he was just a low-ranking goblin. Glancing at his fallen comrades, he dismissed them as useless just before he lost consciousness. It was now up to Lentian to uncover their true identity and ascertain exactly where they had come from to this region. Lentian successfully captured the enemy and shackled him to the wall, paying no mind to his threats. The captive swore that no amount of torture would ever make him submit to the goblin, and that he would refuse to answer any questions. However, a short time later, the situation changed dramatically as the enemy's anger and attempts to intimidate gave way to fear. Several minutes of interrogation proved to be unbearable for the wild goblin, as Lentian utilized his full arsenal of methods. He could not endure it any longer, and finally yielded, promising to reveal everything he knew if only the torment would cease. Lentian was pleased with his dominance, having at last succeeded in loosening the captive's tongue. Under duress, he confessed his origin, revealing he was from the tribe of the Beast Lords of the Forest, which resides in the Western lands. Their master had once been the owner of this cave and had sent him to recover some important items, making the information highly valuable. However, he had not anticipated finding the territory already under the control of others, whose chief, the leader of the goblins, was poised to become a hegemon. It became evident to Lentian that this was all about some form of treasure, which had to be located, and now everything was different as a new power had taken hold. Lentian continued his interrogation of the wild goblin until the very end, extracting every last piece of potentially useful information. The treasure was discovered, a 7th-ranked corpse ring created by the head of the corpse Connell, which upon activation seals an enemy's soul. Lentian had not imagined that such treasures even existed, and now this ring was his, prompting the prisoner to beg for his release. The ring necessitated the blood of a victim for its activation, so Lentian struck the prisoner, causing blood to spill. Having acquired all the information he needed, Lentian waited for the opportune moment to use the ring on his captive. He had promised the goblin his freedom and did not go back on his word. He released the flesh but claimed the soul. The eyes of the skull adorning the ring began to glow with a green light, signaling its activation. Invoking the ring's power, he absorbed the soul of the wild goblin, thereby augmenting his own strength. The prisoner's eyes reflected a profound fear and desperation, as he refused to accept that the events unfolding around him were real. A green mist enveloped the entire area, saturating the air and the ground and leaving behind a sense of oppressive corruption. The power increase was modest, only 200 units, but it gave him a crucial insight. The souls of more powerful enemies could yield far greater rewards. This meant that his journey was only just beginning, especially if the goblins of the Beast Lord tribe were as formidable as claimed. New souls would become the next stepping stone to his ultimate power, leaving only a lifeless, depleted husk of the monster behind. He considered that with a clever strategy, the captured goblins' tribe could potentially be manipulated and used against the humans by playing on their fears and interests. The Beastmaster tribe would not stand idly by if they discovered that one of their warriors had vanished and that a valuable artifact had fallen into the wrong hands. He examined the ring, feeling the subtle thrum of the soul trapped within it, and pondered the mechanics of how to control the sealed spirit. The knight was astonished at how he had managed to defeat such a monster, one belonging to the tribe of Beast Lords, which is part of the Empire of Lions. A knight, who was a girl, stood nearby, aware of the Beast Lord's tribe, and her surprise was genuine, as even she knew not to meddle with them. This tribe is not merely powerful, it resides near the Great Tomb, which is home to world-level 12 creatures. These creatures could potentially be absorbed to gain their power, a thought that occurred to Lentian at the most opportune time. In her view, the western region was so enveloped in darkness and fear that any contact with such monsters should be avoided. He was now facing one of these very creatures, and as Lentian considered this, an idea came to him. If the soul was alive within the ring, it could be utilized. He requested the Night Girl's help to use her power to implant the soul back into its body, to temporarily restore its personality and give it an order. The objective was simple: send the puppet back to its tribe with a fabricated report, claiming the ring was stolen, but not by them. Lentian specified that the report should claim the ring was stolen by royal aristocrats. The plan involved the empires of Lions, the Stirred, and Philemon clans, and everything was proceeding as intended, as he confessed he had let Siddle go on purpose. He had not spared him, but had used him, setting a trap into which the influential figures of this world would eventually fall. When that occurred, their feud would inevitably reignite, and each faction would be searching for someone to blame. They both understood a fundamental truth. In a clash of titans, the only one who survives is the one who remains in the shadows, while the others are at each other's throats. Count Philemon was seething with rage, his pride wounded by the shame his family had endured from their defeat at the hands of goblins. His son, trembling before him, attempted to explain that their enemy was not merely a band of savages, but an organized, intelligent, and powerful force. Even the elite Grey Hats had been annihilated, and Lodger, one of the most formidable fighters, had barely escaped with his life while in captivity. However, these explanations failed to pacify his father's fury, as losing meant facing ridicule from other houses, which would undermine his authority and diminish his influence. The atmosphere in the hall grew thick with tension as he questioned how his son could dare say such a thing, with the heirs of two prominent families having lost to mere goblins. The son begged for forgiveness, expressing deep remorse for his shameful actions that had nearly resulted in the demise of their entire family. Visions of the goblins, their grotesque faces and wild cries, floated through his mind, still capable of inspiring genuine terror. Count Philemon openly regarded his own son as pathetic and unworthy, making no effort to hide his disdain. Against this tense backdrop, a member of the Stirred clan intervened, his arrival adding to the tension, but instead of hostility, he proposed an alliance. The Count eyed him with suspicion as he listened to the proposal to unite their families, to cleanse the shame of their defeat. Direct military action against their enemies was strictly forbidden, as the king had issued a decree that limited any form of aggression. According to this decree, the high nobility was barred from forming armies without royal permission, and the right to seek revenge had already been granted to the Holy Swordswoman. However, the allies' suggestion was different. He proposed an alternative course of action that would make the king doubt her effectiveness. In order for the king to grant his approval, the aristocrats needed to report on the escalating goblin situation. This would then prompt the king to authorize the aristocracy to dispatch troops, which would bring about the goblins' end. The situation was growing progressively more tense as a subtle game unfolded behind the aristocracy's back, with each party pursuing their own hidden agendas. Some were attempting to curry favor with the king, while others sought to discredit their rivals. Meanwhile, someone else was poised to capitalize on the ensuing chaos for their own personal gain, and the decision to proceed had been made. In the conversations among the nobles, threats, omissions, and hints at their true objectives were veiled under the guise of concern for the kingdom. A few days later, a sense of panic swept through the goblin dungeons as rumbling sounds began to echo. The homemade pistol fired, its shot hitting the intended target as Lenshin tested his new weapon. The goblins covered their ears to block out the thunderous noise, yet at the same time they gazed at their leader with a sense of admiration. Lenshin, without concealing his satisfaction, evaluated the weapon's effectiveness. Though the gunpowder was limited, the principle itself was sound. The elf, having witnessed the demonstration firsthand, began to plead with him to teach her how to shoot, and others quickly followed her lead. Their bodies pressed together in a tight embrace, as if they were trying to remain united forever amidst the surrounding chaos. But it was not long before news spread that well-armed troops had assembled in Guangming. Spies brought back reports that other goblin tribes were among the attacking forces, and that the Beast Lord tribe was approaching. Lenshin grinned, sensing the imminent arrival of a grand battle that held the potential to alter the destiny of the entire world. Meanwhile, within the Empire of Lions itself, at the base of a colossal grave, something alarming and ominous was beginning to stir. One of the goblins came running in a state of panic, reporting that the ring, the ancient and dangerous one, had fallen into the hands of humans. He had barely managed to survive to deliver the news, and the leader of the Beast Lord tribe flew into a rage. He could not come to terms with the loss of the sacred relic, and his eyes blazed with a deep-seated hatred, making the war a personal matter. He felt an intense animosity toward them and gave a firm command that the ring must be recovered at any cost, regardless of the consequences. In Guangming, at the residence of Count Philemon Stewart, the atmosphere was fraught with tension. The Holy Swordswoman was temporarily away on important business, which was causing a great deal of unrest among the guards and nobles. Count Philemon and Stewart arrived at the residence accompanied by his army. The citizens of Guangming greeted them with a sense of obedience. The dragon's servant, a courageous warrior who had fought alongside the Saint Swordswoman, was completely ignored by the Count, an act that sparked outrage. The Count did not initially recognize him, but later calmly explained the reason for his visit and the true objective of his arrival in the city. At the same time, alarming reports of the goblins' advance spread rapidly, instilling fear in everyone. Suddenly, and without any prior warning, the attack commenced, with the goblins descending upon the city with the fury and savagery of predators. There was a surprisingly small number of soldiers stationed at the city gates, and the question of how the goblins had managed to breach the city's defenses hung in the air, unanswered. The troops of the Lion Empire were preparing to unleash their full power to halt the enemy at any cost. A battle was imminent, one that would determine the fate of Guangming and its residents for many generations to come. Employing a combination of magic and swords, the people fought in unison against the bloodthirsty creatures. Lenshin observed the scene from above, seated on his dragon, and assessed the situation with a cold and contemptuous demeanor. The situation was unfolding even more favorably than he had anticipated, with everything pointing toward a swift victory with minimal casualties. To the Count, the goblins appeared to be nothing more than low-level vermin, unworthy of any fear. He was certain that the battle would be concluded in less than an hour. So confident was he in the circumstances. One of the leaders materialized before him, a goblin beastmaster, messenger of corpses, and sinner, at level 79 with no class. However, he now possessed a title and power marked by the blessing of the very god who had bestowed upon him his strength. Lenshin regarded his strength with disgust, unable to comprehend how a simple goblin could have amassed so much power. Everyone was taken aback by the sight of the monster, speculating that it might be the head of the goblins and that they would have to investigate. Loder's sister, Lona, and her brothers made their appearance, and she promised their father that they would distract the goblins while the soldiers handled the rest. The Count urged her to be careful so she would not end up as trash like her brother, and she obediently complied. The girl acted with decisiveness, successfully angering the monster and compelling it to move in accordance with their plan. The monster, having experienced the fiery blows, became enraged, and they wanted to quickly draw it out of the city. Lenshin knew that if the beast were to retreat, it would encounter his own subordinates, which would be an undesirable outcome. He exited the city, and Lentian had to restrain his frustration with the audacious girl who had managed to provoke such fury in the Beast Lord. Lenshin thought with irritation that this impertinent girl was far too lucky in the most dangerous of situations. Corpses were strewn everywhere, and the sounds of screams and pleas were unrelenting as the battle continued. A knight stepped forward to meet the monster, vowing that the goblin's teeth would be his first trophy. The courageous warrior exhorted his allies not to let their guard down and to attack with their full strength. The girl was proud of her status as the top representative of the academy and was determined to win this battle. She executed the highest-ranked martial art, the destroying spear. The girl's strength measured 1,700 points, which significantly surpassed the combat potential of most of the other participants. The monster roared and flew into a rage, displeased that some girl had dared to attack him. This development made the situation even more thrilling as the roar of the Beastmaster filled the air, a precursor to the brutal battle that was to come. A potent energy swirled around, generating an incredible amount of fury and chaos. The roar of the Beastmaster resounded with the words, "Powerful energy, incredible fury." Lenshin struggled to hold onto the dragon's back, trying to calm her before it was too late for everyone involved. No one could comprehend why events had unfolded in this manner, as if destiny had chosen to test them to their absolute limits. How had this unbelievably strong goblin, which no one could handle, appeared? The Count wondered as he writhed in pain, his strength completely gone. In a state of despair, Lona collapsed to her knees before the monster, pleading for salvation and calling out to her father and teacher. The monster advanced relentlessly, and all signs indicated that there was no longer any hope for salvation, nor could there be. Cries for help echoed through the streets as the entire city was consumed by terror, panic, and a chaotic mass exodus, and Lona was captured. The aristocrats took note of the dire situation and were certain that a retreat was not an option. Something dreadful was occurring in the distance, as inhuman screams emanated from that direction. The Count, without concealing his rage, screamed, demanding the return of his daughter, whom the monster had seized with a tentacle and lifted into the air. His subjects attempted to maintain their composure and assured him that victory would soon be at hand. The enormous monster, with a single powerful motion of its fist, hurled the Count backward with great force, smashing his face into the hard ground. The knights immediately launched their attack, attempting to deliver the final, fatal blow. At that moment, high-level magic was unleashed on the battlefield, releasing a concentrated ball of energy toward the monster. A blinding light suddenly pierced the darkness, illuminating the entire area and causing the enemies to recoil in fear. The goblins, overcome with panic, swiftly abandoned the battle, hoping to escape and evade certain death. The monster was finally brought down, its body covered in soot, and a thick plume of smoke rose from it, ascending into the sky. The magician was ecstatic with his own talent, unable to believe his eyes, for he had emerged victorious. It appeared that victory was already theirs, and the magician even declared himself a true traveler. However, the monster suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed the hero whole, inducing a state of horror and panic among all the witnesses. A palpable tension and despair filled the air, as if heralding a new wave of bloodshed. Lentian observed as the young goblin underwent an evolution, its fury reaching level 80, and its total combat power surpassing 3100. This was now the level of a hegemon, and although the evolution was recent, the potential for further growth in its combat power was a cause for alarm. If it continues to consume everything in its path, humanity is destined for defeat, as it has absorbed all the available experience, leaving nothing for Lentian. Lentian recognized that he would have to step in and bring this immense power under control. The goblin shouted with a cunning grin that there would be no escape, that the defectors would be executed on the spot, and then the attack began. The people quickly fled back into the city, where the gates were swiftly closed, barring the way for their enemies. The pursuit of the retreating foes was relentless, with no mercy shown to those who attempted to escape. Lentian gave the command to gather the corpses of their allies immediately and to fall back before the enemy could regroup. In the darkness, a glow flickered among the treetops, and Lentian, assuming he had returned, ordered an immediate retreat. When the goblin seized the man and demanded that he hand over what he was looking for, the man replied that he had nothing of the sort. The goblin, filled with contempt for the weak, decided to kill him, believing that lower creatures were not worthy of bargaining with him. However, at the very last moment, a sword strike was delivered unexpectedly, nearly disrupting Lentian's order. The swordswoman had returned, ready to deliver punishment to the guilty, and she had not come alone, bringing with her support that could alter the course of events. Mark Serre entered the fray, interrupting the brutal scene, and his appearance dramatically changed the situation. Osden expressed his surprise that the goblin was being treated with such cruelty, despite being one of his own kind. Accompanying him was little Emma, and finally, the holy swordswoman and the members of her hunting party appeared. Dawn was just beginning to break, and Lentian was also present, not having expected the hunters to arrive at that precise moment. His original plan had been to suppress the monster himself, but he now realized that his intervention was no longer necessary. The monster activated its true nature of cruelty skill, which allowed it to gain partial healing by consuming its own kind. Lentian was surprised that such a skill even existed, though he knew that, due to the severe wounds, the recovery process would take some time. Markser noted that the monster had not died despite being pierced through the stomach and chest, a testament to the resilience granted by its hegemon rank. The monster attempted to retreat, pleading to be let go and promising that it was lost and would not return. The swordswoman inquired if he was the boss, and the monster confirmed it, stating that he wanted his property returned. However, doubts began to surface within the group, as no one had stolen anything, contrary to what had been previously claimed. The swordswoman knew this was a ruse, suspecting that another goblin leader had lured this monster into a trap to diminish the hunter's strength. It was strange that a goblin could devise such a cunning plan, and they could not comprehend how goblins were capable of such a thing. Nevertheless, many travelers had perished at the hands of the monster, and it was imperative to prevent its escape. Osden volunteered to resolve the issue, creating a tornado that lifted the monster high into the air. The swordswoman suddenly looked up and noticed a dragon in the sky, with a strange goblin rider perched on its back. Lentian realized that this particular goblin could still prove to be useful, but he understood that its fate was already sealed, and its end was near. If he is allowed to escape, his future helplessness could be exploited. Lentian was in the process of leaving, but the swordswoman was not going to let him go so easily, as there would be no way for him to escape. Lentian cursed in frustration, displeased with the blow that had been dealt. The swordswoman keenly observed the events on the ground, wondering how such a small goblin had managed to evade her strike. Her calculations appeared to have been accurate, and suddenly a hurricane of steel erupted. Lentian, seated on the dragon, commanded it to dodge the dangerous attacks, knowing that if he remained in his current position, his chances of survival were slim. The swordswoman gave chase, unwilling to let her adversary get away. She was confident that no matter what he did or where he ran, she would eventually catch up to him. Lentian noted that he would need to act decisively very soon, as he had no intention of standing by while preparing for the imminent battle. There was no more time to waste. They had to urgently seize all the treasures before anyone else could reach them. A colossal monster burst into the cave, its body trembling with a rage it could no longer suppress. It had a clear sense that someone was observing it from the shadows, concealed behind the rocks, awaiting the perfect moment to strike. For a brief moment it paused, lost in its memories, and came to the conclusion that it was being deceived, causing its rage to flare. The thought, "Everyone will die," flashed through its mind. As it no longer cared who was targeting it, it wanted to destroy them all. "Come out," the monster bellowed, its booming threat echoing off the cave walls. The elf, Yue, and Ifria were hidden deep within the cave, listening intently to the rumbling sounds coming from outside. One of them held out hope that the monster would not dare to enter, while the other was prepared to fight if it became necessary. The night remained tranquil, her confidence stemming from Lentien's reassurances. He had repeatedly told her to stay calm and not to leave her hiding place, and she trusted that he would not let any harm come to them. Outside, the monster persisted in its violent attempts to break in, growling and demanding the return of its ring. At that moment, a shadow fell over the cave as a red dragon descended with a roar, its scales glittering in the moonlight. Lentien was on its back, his appearance anticipated, but it was now too late to escape from the trap that had been sprung. The dragon spread its wings and unleashed a torrent of moonfire toward the monster, the flames roaring across the rocks and engulfing the enemy. Lentien leaped down, quickly brandishing his crossbow as he prepared for the inevitable and challenging battle ahead. On his hand, a ring shone, a familiar black one, with a green luminescence, and the sight of it brought the monster to a halt in its rage. The realization struck its mind. The one standing before it possessed its lost item, and its rage boiled over as it understood it had been tricked. Lentien clenched his fist, his gaze fixed on the monster, while on his hand the ring that had fueled the enemy's fury sparkled. It charged forward, unleashing a barrage of blows, but Lentien stood his ground, calm as if he already knew the outcome. He allowed the monster to draw perilously close before delivering a devastating counterstrike. He channeled not only his physical strength into the blow, but also the latent potential awakened deep within him, which granted him incredible power and energy. As if his internal limits had been shattered, a message flashed in Lentien's mind. He had acquired a super high-level skill known as soul destruction, which possessed destructive power capable of obliterating the life energy of his opponents. Activating this new gift, he infused his next attack with the very essence of this destructive energy. The monster, caught completely off guard, convulsed and collapsed to the ground. It was as if its very life force had been torn from its body, and it experienced a pain that pierced to the very depths of its mind. Lentien stood amidst the swirling ashes, feeling an unfamiliar power pulsating through his body. He had not expected to actually acquire this skill, and was now realizing the full extent of his transformation. The monster staggered back to its feet, its body battered but its eyes still alight with hatred. The next blow struck Lentien, sending him reeling backward, yet he rose immediately as if he had felt no pain. A sinister grin, brimming with contempt and a bloodthirsty anticipation momentarily flashed across the monster's face. Before him stood a goblin consumed by rage, its aura shimmering with a foreboding energy. Its total strength was 2,700, and even Lentien had to admit that the enemy was truly formidable. However, he was also aware of something else. The monster had already engaged in battle with the hunters, which worked to his advantage, as it was now weakened. The blows came one after another, and with each exchange, it became increasingly clear that Lentien held the upper hand. Despite the beast's savage strength, he skillfully dodged its attacks, leaving the enemy with dwindling chances of success. The monster mentally cursed the unfolding events, unable to believe it was losing to a mere goblin. However, one of Lentien's powerful strikes broke through its defense, knocking it to the ground. There was not a single morsel of food in the vicinity that could restore its strength, nor any chance for it to regenerate. If it were to be hit in a critical spot, it would be the end. And Lentien approached, looking down at his defeated foe. His voice was firm as he stated that, if the monster had not been of some use, he would have already torn out its heart. Lentien gazed at the fallen monster, feeling neither compassion nor indecision. If it became necessary, he could seal its soul within the ring to augment his own power. But it was evident that this victory was merely the first step. The plan grew more complex with the intervention of the Holy Swordswoman squad in the middle of the battle, an act that led to a revelation. One of her men was particularly noteworthy, Marshall, who possessed the rare talent of being able to move through the ground. He would be able to track them with ease, even in the most secluded locations, which prompted the knight to ask directly what the next plan was. Lentian considered that the captured monster was clearly not a creature from the Great Grave, and he saw an opportunity in this. He thought that if he could use its past and somehow link it to the creatures of the Great Grave, he could incite a conflict between these two forces. He decided to let them annihilate the enemies of the Empire and the Holy Swordswoman themselves, thereby sowing chaos with his own hands. The risk involved was substantial, as the intervention of the creatures from the Great Grave could have unforeseen consequences. Nevertheless, Lentian was certain that this course of action was the most efficient way to reach his objective. Lentian issued the command to inform all the creatures of the Great Grave about what had transpired and to present them with the demon's ring as proof of the insult. This was intended to serve as a justification for their revenge. As if the rage of the ancient beings could be directed appropriately, the tide of the war could be turned. The Goblin Queen's voice was filled with a steely resolve as she gave the order, and now everything was set to unfold according to Lentian's plan. The goblins congregated around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, which created an ominous atmosphere in the stillness of the night. Lentian, positioned away from the group, immersed himself in his system's interface, his attention captured by a notification of 300 accumulated points. This was a sufficient amount to activate one of the advanced features, which unlocked new possibilities and potentials. The system presented the option to summon a 6th-ranked demon, a creature that would be completely subservient to the summoner's will. Lentian contemplated the offer. At first, it seemed like a viable method for bolstering the camp's defenses, but he quickly dismissed the notion. In terms of power, such a demon was on par with the furious goblin, making the expenditure of resources unwarranted, as other options appeared far more appealing. Dark Fusion is an ability that enables one to absorb body parts from vanquished foes and integrate them into one's own body. The Blood of Destruction, when applied, meant that every hit dealt by the wielder would inflict a destruction effect, and abilities of the holy type were neutralized. It was the ideal weapon for combating saints and any who drew their power from the light, and Lentian frowned as he weighed the possibilities. He envisioned himself merging with the wings of a mechanical dragon to acquire the skill of flight. He also imagined how he could connect with the eyes of a jellyfish to gain the ability to petrify his enemies with a single glance. Lentian came to a decision. Although Dark Fusion appeared limited initially, Lentian's lips curled into a slight smile, for a new phase of the game had just begun, and all that remained was to find suitable prey. The system reported a failure in the blood exchange, but as compensation, Lentian received the miracle effect and had 300 life points restored. He was pleasantly surprised and remarked with a touch of humor that if the system were a person, particularly a woman, he would express his thanks. Following this, the Dark Fusion exchange was successful, providing a new enhancement that reduced the limitations of the Goblin's absorption ocean. Lentian had acquired 2 valuable awards simultaneously, each paving the way to new echelons of power. This event opened up limitless prospects for him to rapidly increase his power and influence. Yue and Euphria observed Lentian, taking note of the change in him. He appeared exhausted, but also content. The women strongly urged him to take a rest, concerned that his body would soon be unable to cope with the stress. A brief period of rest will help you recover your strength before you face the next set of challenges. The leader was clearly in need of something, and they were eager to provide it for him. The girls speculated whether he desired that particular form of entertainment and to immerse himself in the gentle bliss of ecstasy. However, he politely declined, stating that his body could not handle the constant strain, and he requested only a single day of rest. The chief received word that the man had once again done something wrong, this time stealing 2 guns, so they went to investigate the matter. Loder sat on the floor, lamenting his actions and blaming himself for what had transpired, believing he had ruined his family, his sister, and his father, condemning them to death. He was consumed with guilt over his family and was deeply tormented by the loss of his parents and sister when he saw Lentian approach. Loder threw himself at Lentian's feet, his eyes welling with tears, his sole concern being whether his parents were still alive. Within his tormented soul, a faint but stubborn glimmer of hope persisted, preventing him from breaking completely. Lenshin informed him that his father had been bitten to death by the hegemon and that his sister's body had long since been desecrated. He lifted his gaze to the sky, realizing he should not have behaved in such a manner or acted like such a smart aleck. Loder, clutching his head, finally acknowledged his mistake and was filled with regret for his past arrogance. Fortunately, Afria was still alive, and there was a chance that the priests from the church could save her. He felt as though he were already dead inside, with no reason left to live, and he suddenly jumped up and ran forward, smashing his head against a rock. Loder lay bleeding after his impact with the wall, having wished to end his own life, as the pangs of his conscience gave him no rest. Despite his severe emotional turmoil, he continued to think of others, and after a significant amount of time had passed, the hatred that Lentian had once harbored gradually faded, and it was now time for him to acknowledge and accept his own suffering. In the great forest of graves, the Beast Lord of the Goblin settlement appeared, requesting an audience with Lord Nu. He had urgent and critically important matters to discuss, as any delay could lead to dire consequences. A creature that was half bull and half goblin appeared before him, a terrifying figure of immense size, from which power and might emanated. He pleaded for assistance, wishing to retrieve his belongings, but he reported that his entire clan had been wiped out and that humans were responsible. He was known as the Man-Eater Nu Dali, and he gave the command to continue the battle and to obey him, and in return he restored everything to him. The Beast Lord bowed before Nu Adali, and the ring he now held shone with strength and power. His claws gripped the ancient relic tightly, the one thing that could offer salvation in this hellish place. Despite an agreement with the church that forbade trade within human territory, he was granted permission to enter their lands and seek his revenge. It had been a long time since he had last feasted on fresh flesh, and now the thirst for vengeance and power once again filled him. He had successfully secured his backing, as the Man-Eater Nu Dali had agreed to assist him in his quest for retribution. The moment had come to once again recall a forgotten sensation, the flavor of combat, terror, and bloodshed that infused his heart with power. A number of days went by. Lentian meticulously examined his system, which now identified him as a level 70 goblin bearing the moniker Evil God. Additionally, he held the titles of Almighty Creator and Blessed by God, with a total power level of 3,100 and skills including Dark Transformation, Blood of Doom, and Rupture. Despite extensive training, significant growth, and a newfound sense of mastery over the Blood of Doom, he acknowledged that the power disparity with the Sword Saint, who possessed 4,000 points of power, remained immense. His only viable option was to form alliances, although such endeavors consistently proved to be far more challenging than anticipated. As long as he maintained a single step ahead, he could amass an army and launch an assault on Guangming without any further need for pretense. Soon thereafter, Lin Chang was informed that the furious goblins were awaiting his presence at the cave. The Goblin Queen was grappling with internal reservations regarding the necessity of accompanying him to Guangming. He quickly put her uncertainties to rest, explaining that her assistance was not required and that her presence might only complicate matters in the confrontation with the Holy Swordswoman. The knight had already issued commands to the goblins, demanding their compliance, and she had threatened Lengshan with punishment should he fail. He retorted that it was yet to be determined who would be the one punishing and who would be punished. Leng Qian disengaged from her embrace and strode forward, his demeanor exceptionally serious before the impending fight, and the knight could not conceal her astonishment. After Leng Qian's departure, she was left by herself, lost in her thoughts, aware that they were on the cusp of facing severe ordeals. Leng Qian's curt and cold response had wounded her, leaving a sense of bitterness in her soul and compelling her to seriously reflect on his words. Leng Qian stepped out from behind the waterfall's curtain and found himself immediately confronted by a massive, hideous monster. The Beast Lord bowed respectfully before him, which took Nu Dali by surprise, as the Lord's friend was merely a low-ranking goblin. Standing before him was Nu Dali, a level 80 bull demon with a berserker specialization and the title of 7th-ranked demon in Cannibal. This was a dreadful man-eater, far more powerful than he had anticipated. The demon bull had not expected to encounter Leng Qin, having anticipated a 6th-ranked demon at the most, but his assumption was incorrect. In spite of this, Leng Qin displayed no signs of fear, and the Beast Lord assured New Dolly that he was not weak, though he dismissed his words as nonsense. A climactic battle awaited them, one that was destined to set everything in its proper place. The city was not at rest, as guards protected the fortress walls, maintaining a watch around the clock. Guangming was in a state of high alert, bracing for an impending attack, with numerous swordswomen inside prepared to fight. The demon was on the verge of unleashing his beast when the ground suddenly trembled, and the knights sensed the approach of disaster. The monsters, a host that included many bull demons, charged forward, rushing directly toward the humans. The events that unfolded were akin to a powerful earthquake. As the earth shook, rocks crumbled, and the sky grew dark. The bull demon appeared incredibly fearsome, but Leng Qin held the belief that a sentient goblin could be far more dangerous. The monsters initiated their attack by devouring the city's residents, and Guangming was on the brink of being completely overrun. The scent of fresh meat lingered in the air, which awakened a savage appetite and an uncontrollable fury within the bull demons. At the most critical juncture, the Holy Swordswoman made her appearance, ready to atone for the mistakes of the past. All the streets were teeming with bull demons that had emerged from the graves, causing widespread havoc among the inhabitants. She realized that the escaped goblin leader had brought the bull demons to the city and that he should have been eliminated during their last encounter. It was her error in allowing them to come, her pursuit of the goblin, that had become a fatal miscalculation. It was a mistake she now planned to rectify at any cost, even if it meant her own death. The swordswoman swiftly charged into the fray, resolved to destroy the bull demon no matter what it took. Leng Qin was positioned on the roof of the chapel, closely observing the fierce duel unfolding between the swordswoman and the bull demon. Even though the demon's total strength was marginally less than that of the light swordswoman, he possessed a considerable advantage due to his fighting style, a brutality and relentlessness that favored him in a prolonged engagement. The demon employed earth techniques, powerful elemental abilities that he had meticulously prepared, waiting for the ideal moment to unleash them. His opponents found themselves literally sinking in the sands, which were drawing people into a deadly trap. Leng Qin summoned the power of the earth, and a sparkling golden tornado erupted from the depths, annihilating everything in its path. It was an explosion of earth elements rocked the immediate vicinity, and people near the epicenter of the battle were thrown to the ground, feeling the full force of the impact. The situation grew increasingly tense, and the outcome of the battle became less and less certain. The Beast Lord captured one of the knights, which further complicated the situation. Marxer was now at the mercy of the monsters, and Ima rushed to his aid. As a master of advanced archery and the wielder of the divine wind arrow, she entered the conflict. The arrows she fired never found their mark, instead scattering in midair as if they had been intercepted by an unseen force. Ima anxiously tried to determine what had just happened and why her arrows had failed to reach their intended target. Leng Qin reflected on his own agility, acknowledging that without it, he would have been unable to stand against the elven race. Despite the tense situation, the monster complied with Leng Qin's command and released Marshall's body. Thanks to his Goblin Lord technique, Leng Qin now held a position of power on the battlefield. Leng Qin approached Marxer's body with the intention of absorbing his power, thereby transforming the fallen foe into a source for his own strength. The girl was horrified by what she witnessed and called out to the Marshal for help. At the same time, Osdine unleashed the power of his advanced skills, splitting stone and executing an unarmed grab. A tense battle, characterized by skill and strength, unfolded between Marshall and Leng Qin. In reaction to Marshall's active skill, Leng Qin immediately countered with his own technique, an unarmed grab that blocked the burst of energy. The Marshal expressed his regret over the failed attack, while Leng Qin utilized his aftertaste skill. The girl watched the knights fight with rapt attention. The Marshal had seemed incredibly powerful to her, yet even he had become a casualty in the battle. Now his remains were being consumed by monsters, and she could not comprehend how such a thing was possible. Leng Qin experienced a surge of strength as his level rose to 75, and his total combat power reached 3,200. An increase of 5 levels was a truly significant gain, and the power coursing through his veins demanded to be unleashed. The archer smiled and loosed an arrow toward Lentian, but he skillfully sidestepped it. The second arrow also went wide, thanks to another well-executed dodge. The girl, perched on the roof, noticeably increased her rate of fire, and if it had not been for the stone wall, Lentian would have been unable to avoid being hit. Lentian gave the command for the monster to demolish the bell tower, and the beast charged forward, destroying the walls. The tension in the air intensified with each passing second, as the decisive moment drew inexorably closer. The barrage of arrows suddenly ceased, as the monster intercepted the girl, thwarting her desperate attack. Ima will not be able to catch up with him, Lentian observed, knowing he had time to conceal himself while she waited for her skills to recharge. The enemy is fleeing, but the archer does not give up the chase, firing arrows in pursuit without ever losing sight of him. Lentian evades the blows, but the heroine is exhausted and can barely remain on her feet, her strength rapidly diminishing. She must hold on until the very end, for there is very little time left, and her sacrifice will not be in vain. She collapses to the ground as the monster looms over her, its mouth open, ready to deliver the final fatal blow. Lentian steps in, driving the monster away and preventing it from finishing her off, then approaches the now defenseless girl. Such a powerful elf cannot simply be taken and devoured like some insignificant prey in a cave. He lifts her into his arms and carries her away, not allowing the monster to complete what it had started. When she awakens, she discovers that she is bound, and a goblin is standing before her. It is Lentian. He is naked, and she wonders what is happening and what he is doing, as this does not seem like any normal magic technique, and the knots will not yield. He taunts her and makes no secret of his intentions, leaving her confused and unsure of what is transpiring, or perhaps simply unwilling to believe it. The swordswoman battles the goblin bull, striking relentlessly despite her fatigue, and she eventually vanquishes her foe. The monster's body slumps to the ground, and she slits its throat, acknowledging that it was not an easy fight. She slowly turns around and freezes in horror, as what is happening now defies all description. Ima is on her knees, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword, poised to strike, for she no longer wishes to live. The swordswoman notices this, but is too late to prevent the tragedy, as fate approaches and she delivers the decisive blow. Ima is on the brink of death, and the swordswoman holds her close, unwilling to let her go. The faces of the deceased flash through her mind, Marshall and Osden, all of whom have been dead for some time. Ima is in a state of despair, knowing she is carrying a goblin's child and that she will not give birth to it, and she implores the swordswoman to avenge them. The past comes rushing back, and fear and shame seize her mind, but the desire for vengeance grows even stronger. Ima is dead, and the swordswoman is now alone, the sole person capable of fulfilling the will of the fallen and exacting revenge. Madness begins to take hold of the swordswoman as she raises her blade, her eyes burning with a mixture of determination and fury. She strikes, impaling herself, and this act of self-sacrifice becomes her solemn oath as darkness consumes her body. A golden luminescence emanates from the swordswoman as she ascends into the sky in a shining sphere, illuminating everything around her. The knights retreat in panic at her command, unable to withstand her immense power and terrified by her new, fearsome form. Her power continues to grow, to the point that even her allies are afraid to get close to her, and everyone flees from the saint. Lentian turns around, sees the approaching glow, and realizes that the situation is spiraling out of his control. Panic ensues as equipment is launched, the ground fractures underfoot, and a powerful energy fills the entire area. Lentian understands that the situation is dire and that no one can hide from what is coming, as the swordsman's ultimate technique gains momentum. The ancient artifact, Supreme Retribution, has been activated, and its power is now fully embodied within her. She descends to the ground, her strength having reached its zenith, with her total combat power now estimated at 5,000. Lentian manages to escape and wonders why the swordswoman would take such a drastic risk, having thought she was a knight, but discovering she is a mage. She is renowned as the invincible, holy swordswoman, her blade serving as a symbol of the kingdom's protection and might. The people celebrate, rejoicing in her power, but the swordswoman has sustained a wound to her stomach, and her strength has been halved. Her fighting power has dropped to 2,500, but the enemy has not yet been defeated, and the battle rages on. It is not over yet, for the true killer has not been slain, and she consumes a potion to recover, but is suddenly struck down by a powerful blow from behind. The goblin attacks once more, acting in a cowardly manner with the goal of weakening the saint at this critical juncture. The people rush to her aid, putting their own lives at risk to shield her from the new and looming threat of death. Lenshin is positioned at the top of the tower, observing the battle below as he prepares his next devastating strike. The defenders of the kingdom rise to fight, urging the swordswoman to retreat and tend to her wounds. Lentian reacts to the insult with a flash of rage in his eyes, his hand instinctively reaching for his crossbow. He reminds him that he is a goblin and expresses his disbelief that anyone else would dare to lecture him. The response is instantaneous as the tension escalates, with the knights vowing to avenge the count and kill him, causing the crowd to erupt with a mixture of rage and fear. Lenshin draws his sword, lunges forward, and dispatches the attackers without a moment's hesitation. Blood soaks the ground, but the knights refuse to fall back, their objective being to buy more time for the saint. Despite their fear, they advance, united by a desperate resolve and a shared battle cry, ready to give their hearts for victory. Lentian's blows shatter their armor, the metal fracturing under the force of his frenzied blade, and he declares he will take their hearts if that is what they desire. His eyes burn as he harvests the hearts of his enemies, becoming a living embodiment of pure rage. The battle continues, the chaos intensifies, and the ground trembles from the force of the blows as the fight enters its brutal climax. The swordswoman launches an attack despite her fatigue. Her movements are slower, but her will to fight remains unbroken. Lentian rushes at her, and the fight becomes a tough one, as even with a strength of 2,500, he finds it difficult to repel her assault. He employs high sorcery, summoning magical threads that cause the knights to fall under his blows. The swordswoman activates the divine sacred sword, causing her energy to flare and her strength to surge once more. Demonic skills have little effect on her, as her inherent holiness suppresses the darkness and breaks the spells. The outcome of the fight is still uncertain, with both combatants at risk of losing, and the tension is reaching its absolute limit. The advantage is now on the side of the saint, as her power begins to affect even Lenshin himself, a fact that is becoming increasingly clear. It is time to make a decision, to retreat or to fight to the very end, for the stakes are now incredibly high. The knights charge into battle once again, but Lenshin seizes them and hurls them away with a terrifying display of force. The battle rages on, with swords flashing and spells tearing the earth apart, and the outcome will be determined by the final blow alone. Lenshin strikes at the knights, who are now confused and afraid, unsure of how to counter his relentless onslaught. The swordswoman calls out to Lentian, telling him to stop and come closer in an attempt to hold him back. But he leaves, disappearing among the bodies. Using the corpses of his enemies as cover, Lentian skillfully evades her attacks, his speed now surpassing that of the holy swordswoman. She pursues him, attempting to break the enemy's faith and weaken his defenses, in order to secure a victory. An hour passes, and the knights, now in agony, plead for death, begging the saint to put an end to their suffering. Lenshin declares that it will all conclude here, and that she will not be leaving as the victor. The swordswoman screams at him not to run away, but Lenshin takes a hostage and threatens him with death. He kills the prisoner, hoping to break the saint's spirit, drive her mad, and shatter her will to fight. The methods of killing the saints that Lenshin had conceived were far more terrifying than any demons known in this world. Lenshin kills everyone in his path, and the swordswoman is horrified to realize that she has destroyed the very people she was sworn to protect. She clutches her head in despair, and at that moment, Lentian hurls a knife smeared with his own blood at her, wounding her in the chest. And the swordswoman collapses to her knees, overcome with pain as she contemplates her fate and the nature of divine justice. Having tried to protect everyone, it begins to rain, and she falls into the mud, defiled by the blood of her defeat and losing her strength, feeling as though God has forsaken her. Lenshin invites her to become his ally, to join the Goblin army and help him overthrow the religious fanatics. He calls her strong yet broken, and promises her new power in a new world, one free from the old gods. Thunder rumbles as the swordswoman lies unconscious on the damp earth, enveloped by the rain and the darkness. Lentian approaches her, his gaze filled with a desire to possess her, and he slowly draws near to the defenseless woman. Footsteps are heard in the distance as a church detachment appears, with people rushing to offer their aid, causing the monsters to retreat in fear. Lentian looks after them, stunned by this unexpected intervention. As the church now enters the battle, a garrison of knights materializes behind them, numerous and advancing, ready for both battle and rescue. The Bishop of the Holy Guard of the Cross displays his authority and unwavering determination. The swordswoman lies on the wet ground, and no one had anticipated that such a misfortune would befall her, concluding that the goblin is to blame for everything. Lentian tenses up, steeling himself for the coming fight, but the knights advance with their full force and unwavering confidence. The knight takes note of the misfortune that has befallen the swordswoman, and his thoughts are filled with a mixture of pity and resolve. Lentian reveals his true form, that of a goblin concealed behind a weak and harmless facade. His power is terrifying, and he is a true demon, prepared to fight to the very end to achieve his goal. The Holy Guard invokes the powers of God and readies himself to banish the demons, with the wish of bringing prosperity to the world. The knights stand poised to attack Lentian and his dark forces. Lentian waits, sizing up his adversaries as his magic envelops his body in preparation for a defense. He notes the knights' heavy armor, but is surprised by their speed and agility in combat. The battle commences, and the total strength of the Holy Guard reaches 3,000 units, causing the pressure to increase. The knights are on the offensive, their power and faith granting them an advantage against the demon and his sorcery. And Lentian realizes the true power of the church. Lentian employs decomposition magic, observing how the blood kills his enemies, decomposes their bodies, and diminishes their power. His holy power is a form of forbidden magic, but it is not always potent enough against such well-organized troops. The demon within him is revealed, showing his true nature is not just a goblin wearing a mask. Realizing that his plan has failed, Lentian makes the decision to retreat in order to avoid a complete and utter defeat. The knights prepare to return, acknowledging that the child requires purification and spiritual guidance. Without a priest, a child is at risk of falling into a life of debauchery, which could have dangerous consequences for everyone. One of the knights questions whether the bishop will be capable of dealing with the goblins and protecting the shrine. Also mentioned is the priestess of Ephraia, who is set to play a significant role in future events and destinies. The bishop concedes that the time for salvation is already running out, and it is assumed that the archbishop has already selected a new priestess. At the two, searching for the old one is no longer a sensible course of action, and the knights understand that the future now hinges on a new priestess and the divine will which they must trust. Lentian shakes the dust from himself and surveys the battlefield, where the bodies of the monsters are already buried and forgotten beneath the earth. The body of the goblin bull remained where it had fallen, and now they could finally hold a proper feast at its expense. The system displays a message: congratulations on reaching level 80, and Lentian begins his journey home. The girls are wondering if he has won again, thinking he must have become even stronger, and they ask him to tell them everything. The leader returns to his home, and everyone can see that he has grown even stronger, his power having clearly increased. He reminds them of his recent deeds and of the holiness of the swordswoman whom he had defeated and with whom he had a relationship. It is a pity that the Holy Church took her away, but this does not diminish the recognition of her power and status. The knight expresses her interest and invites him to her quarters, calling him very cool and wishing to reward him. However, he suggests they first discuss important matters, as they are celebrating a major victory in the time they have gained for the tribe's development and their planned move. They need to find a new location where they will be free from the fear of retribution from the human race and its followers. The new home will be situated in a sacred place where even representatives of the Holy Church are hesitant to enter without permission. A holy grave. The goblins assemble in the center of the tribe, discussing the terms of peace and strategizing for their future development. The Holy Grave has signed a non-aggression pact with the Holy Church, ensuring peaceful coexistence. The treaty has established a safe zone for the tribe, allowing them to grow and prosper without the threat of external attacks. The next step is to prepare for reproduction and the strengthening of their lineage in order to increase their numbers. The primary objective is to capture humans alive, avoiding lethal force to gain a strategic advantage. Those who offer resistance are permitted to be dealt with according to the discretion and circumstances of the moment. Lentian mounts his dragon and prepares to fly off to attend to important tasks outside the tribe. The goblins agree to the plan and are ready to proceed in accordance with the new peace strategy. In a matter of a few days, after passing through more than 10 villages, they successfully captured 230 women for the tribe. This is still far from the desired number, as the route covers 700 kilometers and requires passing through 19 villages. There are 2 small cities ahead, and the objective is to capture more than 1,000 people to strengthen and expand the tribe. A small town is visible on the horizon, and bags are being readied to quickly capture the inhabitants and then move on. The town of Cursella is greeted by its mayor, who attempts to reassure the residents by stating that it is just a group of goblins. They laugh as they recall the number of goblins they have already managed to destroy, feeling proud of their strength and courage. Cursella's cohort readies itself to confront the goblins at the city gates and to destroy any who dare to approach. A warning is issued, however, that these goblins are stronger and larger than the normal ones, and they should not be underestimated. Ace, a level 50 adventurer, accepts the challenge, vowing to blow his enemies to smithereens. Everyone is preparing for the battle, and the tension is mounting, as a clash is imminent, the outcome of which depends on many factors. The goblins will be arriving shortly, and the people, under the leadership of Mayor Frank, are preparing for the upcoming battle. Screams are heard from all around as the residents, tense and ready, prepare to fight for their homes and lives without any fear. Among them, there is talk of a competition to see who can kill the most goblins, with the loser promising to treat everyone. However, one of the warriors warns that their opponent is taking on too much and is overly ambitious, suggesting they should compete with him instead. Another is confident in his own abilities and promises to handle the enemy by himself, telling the others to simply watch. Suddenly, a dragon appears with a goblin on its back, causing a mixture of amazement and fear among those present. The dragon is followed by a massive army of goblins, prepared to attack the city and its defenders. The people are panicking, trying to comprehend why the dragon has allied with their enemies and what kind of monsters these are. In their fear and confusion, they begin to retreat, rushing to escape the looming threat. Some people scream and plead not to be abandoned, but many residents are attempting to flee the city to save their own lives. Lentian wondered if so many people had actually prepared to fight the goblins on this particular day. He decided to press forward and prepare for battle, assessing both the strength of his opponents and his own capabilities. The people fought desperately against the goblins, with everyone trying to protect their homes and loved ones from the enemy. One of the knights reminds Ace that he had promised to handle the goblins by himself and that he needs to act quickly. The panic intensified, and screams and shouts were heard as the goblins demonstrated their terrifying strength in battle. Many began to question whether these creatures were actually goblins or something far more dreadful. People fell and died, their initial hopes of an easy victory quickly dissipating in the brutal reality of the battle. The screams of horror from the people could be heard for many kilometers as the city fell before the monsters' advance. The goblins were surprised, having thought that the entire affair should have been more entertaining, but the reality was quite different. The goblins, having obtained everything they desired, departed from the city and continued on their journey. All that is left of the once majestic city are ashes, rubble, and the broken bodies of its exhausted people. The scent of humans now spreads over a radius of hundreds of kilometers, which will undoubtedly attract demons, a warning given by the man-eating hawk. The production process generates a large amount of sweat, which in turn increases durability, and it cannot be halted, not even by the smell of goblins. It is not surprising that people are afraid of the Great Tomb, as its atmosphere alone evokes a sense of fear and anxiety. Being in the Great Tomb for the first time, Lentian was surprised, but agreed to do whatever was necessary for their future safety. The cannibal froze in astonishment at the sight of so many people, unable to understand why Lenshin had brought them here. The hawk listens to the explanations and learns that the numerous people in this location are tools for the reproduction of Goblin. The man-eating hawk is angered by this, as it is a violation of their agreement, and he does not want war. The treaty between the Great Tomb and the Church explicitly prohibits conflict, ensuring peace and order in this area. The people were captured before they arrived here, so it does not technically violate the agreement, and their safety is guaranteed with the cannibals' support. If any problem should arise, it is recommended to contact the hawk, who will assume responsibility for their protection. The goblins can now develop peacefully in this location, free from the threat of attacks or conflicts with the church and its people. The man-eating hawk takes his leave to report the situation to the honorable ones, without any further ceremony. Lenshin breathes a sigh of relief, realizing that he can now proceed with the development of his tribe in peace. 3,000 goblins have been registered this month, and their population continues to increase on a daily basis. UA reported that none of the 10 hybrids tested, which were from the dominant species, had survived. The creation of hybrids in dominant species has proven to be impossible, casting doubt on their future development. Despite this setback, there are plans to begin capturing demonic beasts to increase the population of lower-level goblins. Lenshin requires them solely as a resource to compensate for his magical and physical deficiencies. Evening descended, and Lenshin was contemplating his future plans in his tent. There is no longer a need to personally hunt demons, as a simulation system will now be utilized. The life simulation system is being launched to accelerate the processes of development and population growth. To expand his power, it is necessary to breed a large number of goblins and thereby increase the size of his army. Lenshin leads his army into the enchanted forest to commence hunting and to enhance the capabilities of his tribe. On the first day, they encounter 4th and 5th level demons, all of which are destroyed and their bodies captured for goblin sustenance. Within a few days, 500 level 1 demons were captured, including a rabbit and a crying monkey for the tribe. On their journey back, a level 7 bear with a strength of 3,000 points is captured, which improves the race's resource pool. Additionally, several other level 7 demons were captured, which significantly bolstered the tribe's strength. After a period of 3 months, the tribe has expanded and has been augmented with 2,000 reproductive tools for future growth. While in the midst of enjoying this rapid development, the tribe is suddenly assaulted by humans. Lenshin was surprised by the attack from the humans, as who would have thought that there could be enemies within the well-developed Great Tomb? But the first option was to meet them face to face. The second was to defend their positions, and the third was to attempt to initiate negotiations. The ally remained silent as the soldiers descended from the mountain, and a massacre ensued within the tribe, which was quickly engulfed in chaos and blood. Surrounded by the saint and the generals, Lentian managed to escape the battlefield with only a handful of survivors, utterly defeated. The outcome was the lion's fury, but first, he had to ensure he would not be bitten in order to survive the fight. The score for the battle was 10 points in 100, with a reward of life points multiplied by 10, and the time remaining was until the end of the month. It is now time to devise a plan before they arrive, so they can seize the opportunity to launch a counterattack. The main enemy and his tribe reside in a high forest, and this thorn in the side of the Lionheart Empire must be removed. It is also imperative to confront the Divine Holy Church, which is currently consolidating its power in these lands. A month later, no one knew if the enemies would actually come, as the Great Tomb had signed a treaty with the Church, leaving the Hawk doubtful. This simply cannot be, as no one would dare to violate the ancient treaty that was protected by blood oaths. Lenshin insisted, and outside he could see the approaching armies, which were accelerating and preparing to avenge their past defeats. The hawk realized with a sense of horror that this was true, and that the battle was now inevitable, its outcome already sealed by the forces of fate. And Lentian was not concerned, as the man-eating hawk had promised that no one would be allowed to commit outrages and enter the Great Tomb. He pledged to return as soon as he had reported the situation, while the enemy army continued its advance into Goblin territory. A large and gloomy army approached the walls of the forbidden place, where an entire family had once met their end. The warriors had gathered with the certainty that today they would return home as victors, fully prepared to destroy the goblins. The knights spotted a dragon with a goblin flying on its back, confirming that the intelligence they had received was not mistaken. A fierce battle is coming, one in which there will be only a single victor, and evil must be punished. The people, filled with anger, blamed the goblins for the destruction of dozens of villages that had been left undefended. Lentian reminded them of the agreement between the tomb and the church, but the people still chose to challenge him, completely ignoring his words. The enemies referred to the goblins as rats that had infested the great grave and had no intention of maintaining peace. The commander threatened to annihilate them all with an army of 10,000 to avenge his grandfather and Iris and to tear the goblins apart. So that is how it is. The descendants have come to seek revenge for the deaths of their family members. The conversation shifted to the Holy Swords woman, whom Lentian described as juicy and sweet as honey, a comment that enraged the warriors. She wanted him to be quiet and to shut his mouth, as the dirty goblin had decided to mock the saint. The commander ordered his soldiers to advance and to avenge their own, preparing for a ferocious battle. Lentian wanted to observe his reaction, as who would have thought he would become so angry over a few words. "Wait, noon, for soon you and your race will be in great trouble," the knight threatened. Lentian was not at all surprised, as everything was unfolding exactly in accordance with his own calculations and predictions. The sluggard killed one of the knights, holding his exhausted body with a single hand, thereby making the first move. 10 minutes prior, spies from the knight's army had been observing Lentian's settlement from above. How could these insignificant goblins capture so many people and monsters? They wondered, concluding it was no surprise the saint had suffered at their hands and that they must report everything immediately. However, they were discovered and fell at the hands of the monsters, caught in a trap with no chance of salvation, as the fight was not an equal one. "All troops obey the order. Attack! Cut down the goblins," the commander commanded, and the knights launched their offensive. The commander mocked the goblin, who had probably gotten scared and soiled his pants. He shouted to Lentian. "This is what occurs when you provoke a lion," he declared, promising to break all of his bones, and that he would soon learn the price of his insolence. The man-eating hawk appeared, having overheard all the threats, and thought to himself that it was true. They had indeed come to the forbidden city. It was the man-eating hawk who issued a warning to the knight, telling him to be careful. The hawk commented that he had not seen the church for a long time, and that it seemed they had forgotten the treaty they themselves had proposed. "This is the order of the chief, and he has no authority to negotiate," the knights warned the Aster cannibal. "You won't have much time to show off," the hawk threatened, adding, "When the old wreck dies, I'll crush their heads myself. You don't need to worry about the future, as I am here on my dad's orders to exterminate the goblins, and if you dare to interfere, you will die. All troops, obey the order and continue the attack. Kill all who stand in the way," the knight commanded. "You seem to believe that the Great Tomb is a place where you can come and go as you please, but the hawk will not permit that to happen. So the Great Tomb has chosen to protect the goblins and will not betray the enemies of the Holy Church." "You could say that," the hawk retorted, stating, "He will not allow people to desecrate these lands." The knight fell silent, having wanted this fight, as he viewed it as a mockery of the great church. The knights, overcome with fear, pleaded with the Duke's Highness to give the command to retreat before it was too late. "Holy God, I heard that right. The lions of the Empire would rather perish in battle than be remembered as deserters," the warrior insisted. "We are going to eliminate them," he stated, clarifying that this was not a retreat, but a return to ready themselves for a much larger conflict. Lentian spoke to the man-eating hawk, Lord, expressing his remorse that this course of action had become necessary due to his involvement. This was not solely for his benefit, but also to demonstrate to the figures from the church that the Great Tomb no longer held them in fear. "It is imperative that we expand our clan with all possible speed," the hawk conveyed, adding, "A number of elders within the Great Tomb have placed their faith in Lentian. They have even instructed me to inform you that if he manages to become the Goblin King, he will be deemed worthy of entering the true Great Tomb." The prospect of entering the real Great Tomb was a pleasing and highly motivating thought for Lentian. In the city, meanwhile, A public demonstration was taking place with chants that the saint was no longer fit to wield a blade and that she was a disgrace for breeding goblins. "How revolting," someone exclaimed. "It's shameful that we once held her in such high regard when she is just a piece of filth, a liar, and utterly disgusting. The goblin must be killed." This was precisely what the king had been waiting for. The goblin issue remained unresolved, and now this situation had arisen, pitting the people on one side against her on the other. The decision was now his to make, as Alice sat on her lap, tending to a small goblin who was playing on a wooden horse. He had never anticipated that she would be so profoundly changed by a single goblin, and had he known then, he would have killed it without hesitation, telling her, "Alice, you must step away, as it could have harmed you." She was merely shielding a small child, and could not comprehend what His Majesty was implying. For the welfare of the people and the future of his empire, he was compelled to guide her back to the correct path. He brandished his blade, prompting her to question if His Majesty would truly do this to her as she prepared to fight. She unleashed a highest-level sacred skill, the sacred radiance, but she was struck down to the ground. The cardinal appeared and employed a top-tier sacred skill, the sacred prison sentence, which confined her behind bars. The final decision was deferred to the cardinal, as the king, looking upon her, found himself unable to make the choice. "No, this is her retribution," he declared. "She must endure the punishment of the gods, for she no longer possesses her divine power." The cardinal countered that the gods had not forsaken her, but rather she had forsaken them, pleading, "Give up the goblin, do not resist, Mistress Alice." The cardinal unleashed the holy light, and Alice screamed "no" as her child was killed. The crowd gathered in the street cheered for the emperor, expressing their relief at finally being rid of the monster. Many inquired about the saint's whereabouts, asserting that if she were dead, it would be for the best. The king announced that he had acted upon their will and issued a warning that anyone who dared to speak another word about the Holy Virgin of the Sword would face punishment. "We will be held responsible," someone said, as the baby goblin's corpse was callously thrown to the ground, shocking those who were present. The following day it was reported that Alice had vanished, which caused a great deal of confusion and raised many questions. In the meantime, goblins who now possessed the ability to use magic began to appear in the settlement. One referred to itself as a level 70 berserker of the goblin race, with a class of dark mage. His titles indicated he had been transformed by magic, and he also carried the blessing of the gods as a glutton. The other goblins, observing this, did not consider it particularly special and demanded more meat and blood so they too could reach level 70. The forest was not lacking in monsters, yet the goblins simply sat around idly, expecting to be fed. They would now be required to hunt their own prey, which would simultaneously provide them with combat experience. They had not been actively seeking to enhance their own strength and had survived solely because of their leader, who remained exceptionally dangerous. Lentian felt that he was already contributing a great deal to the tribe, yet the goblins remained dependent on him. Lentian was suddenly taken by surprise at the appearance of the man-eating hawk, who wished to introduce him to one of the other rulers. The hawk was confident that Lentian would be pleased to meet the other rulers, believing that the more influential figures you know, the better. In the event of a perilous encounter with someone who should not be provoked, one could take refuge behind their allies and avoid defeat. The forest floor trembled from the approaching footsteps of the Golden Monitor, the ruler of the South, whose strength was legendary throughout the 4 regions. Lentian stood and watched as the golden-scaled giant emerged from the trees, its form glittering under the sun. Not particularly strong, Lentian thought to himself as he assessed the Golden Vartan race. A half-human at level 88 with a combat power of 3,990. The man-eating hawk formally introduced the Lord of the South, and a palpable tension immediately filled the air. The Golden Monitor surveyed the goblins and humans with the detached gaze of a hunter evaluating potential quarry. An aura of complete dominance radiated from him, yet Lentian did not so much as flinch, for his clan stood firmly behind him, and he intended to claim everything. Disputes quickly erupted over who held ownership of the territory, who was in charge, and whose authority would be enforced. The Golden Vartan's hands clenched into fists as the challenge was implicitly accepted, and Lentian's power was ready to settle the matter without any further words. The goblins advanced, their demeanor confident and composed, and their eyes glowed with a cold, unwavering light. The earth began to shake, tree branches splintered, and the magic in the air ignited, flaring up with a powerful flame. Lentian made it clear that he would not capitulate, not even to the Lord, asserting that the land belongs to the most powerful, a sentiment the man-eating hawk supported. The Golden Monitor let out a growl, but a flicker of respect could be seen in his eyes as he accepted the challenge. The moment of reckoning was fast approaching, with two worlds and two forces converging on a single path to power, and he was determined to kill Lentian. A mighty blow was struck, and the Monitor lizard retreated into the sanctuary of the trees, its gaze a lingering threat upon the land it had failed to conquer. However, the cannibal would not be present forever, and when Varan returned, his vengeance would descend upon his enemies with its full, untamable force. The hawk watched him go with a sense of alarm, as if he already knew that this particular story was far from being concluded. Lentian stood calmly, his thoughts as heavy as stone, and the hawk offered an apology, admitting he had not realized the extent of his greed. He understood that Varan's avarice was merely the prelude to future problems and conflicts that had not yet come to a head. And if Lentian were to kill him, he would have to take his place. Holding the title of ruler of the South conferred the ability to summon demons, leaving him with the choice to either kill now or adhere to the rules of the Great Tomb. The freedom to kill demons was more appealing to him than power, and he would not have changed his ways for anything, though he could have been either punished or made the new ruler of the South. White bones were scattered across the ground, the sun glinting off of gnawed skulls and fractured horns. The goblin felt significant changes within his body, a growth in both size and strength, and the rage inside him became almost unbearably alive. He had undergone an evolution, acquiring a new form and power that transformed him into a creature nearly impossible to withstand. With a single flick of his sting, he could tear down trees as if they were nothing more than thin blades of grass, leaving only stumps in his wake. His power had grown to such an extent that, in the eyes of his adversaries, he had become an invincible, walking hurricane of destruction and fury. Meanwhile, a nearby Monitor lizard, oblivious to the impending danger, was toying with a dragonfly, making itself an easy target for the predator. A massive goblin hand shot out from the shadows, and the lizard dove into the water, narrowly escaping death. The dragonfly, with its transparent wings, vanished into the sky, and the Monitor lizard disappeared beneath the waters of the spring, its life having been cut short in an instant. The scent of fresh blood permeated the forest, awakening the dormant hunting instincts and a sense of anxiety in its inhabitants. The creature had the appearance of a baby, but it stood over 1.5 meters tall and moved with incredible speed, the hunter recounted. The flavor of its flesh was rich and sweet, reminiscent of young men with good blood. The goblin licked its lips, savoring the lingering taste, and thought that if there were more creatures like this, his tribe could develop 3 times as fast. The Varan's home was skillfully concealed among the stone cliffs, a place where neither light nor prying eyes could penetrate. The child persistently ran off into the forest, and the mother grumbled, unable to comprehend what her child was seeking in such dangerous places filled with demons. Varan dismissed her concerns, confident that no one would dare to harm the chieftain's son. Suddenly, they heard a cracking noise, and the female Monitor froze in terror, for before her lay the white bones of a baby, as dry as ash. A goblin leaped out from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a mixture of hunger and delight, showing no respect for the chieftain's territory and laughing at her words. One of the goblins took notice of her face and whispered about how pretty she was, succumbing to his dark desires. Varan seized his spear, furious that the goblin had shown disrespect to the chieftain's wife and believing he must pay for it with his life. The tribe had sworn an oath to protect its women and children, and no one had the right to harm those who were defenseless. However, he was not fast enough, as the blow came from behind, delivered by a goblin who had approached him stealthily, and the warrior fell. The goblin removed his disguise and pierced the enemy with a spear, marking the end of the Monitor lizard's fight. He promised to keep the woman alive, but only for the chief, declaring that the entire settlement now belonged to them. Screams erupted from the opposite end of the village as the demons broke through, and someone recognized the marks, realizing it was the goblin tribe that had launched the sudden attack. The elders ran about in a state of panic as their leader was absent, and the enemy was at their gates, prompting one of the warriors to shout for everyone to gather and arm themselves. The goblins stood perfectly still, as if they had become one with the earth itself, awaiting the impending blow with a silent and cold composure. The battle had commenced, but a sense of hopelessness pervaded the air, and the chances of salvation dwindled with each passing minute. With cries of rage and a hunger for vengeance, the monitor lizards charged into the fray, demanding that blood be spilled for their fallen comrades. The attack was swift, but the goblins managed to throw each of the attackers away with a speed that was almost human. One of the ravens attempted to stab him with a knife, but was met with a deadly response, a blade to the stomach that drained him of his strength. The remaining attackers fell back, taking their wounded with them, as the leader gave the command not to kill everyone. They are needed to survive and to reproduce. And he whispered that he would personally take the most beautiful ones for the master. One of the monitor lizards lay in a pool of its own blood, barely moving as it called out for its master, hoping for a salvation that never arrived. The chieftain of the Veron returned far too late, only to find charred ruins where his home had once stood, and his entire tribe annihilated. He could not believe that this was the handiwork of the goblins, as they would not have dared. And he had been in their village just recently, where everything was quiet and calm. The wounded warrior, with his final breath, reported that the mistress and the heiress had been taken by their enemies and begged for an immediate pursuit. The air carried the scent of his wife, and the heavy odor of goblins lingered nearby. With a fury blazing in his eyes, he vowed to destroy every last one of them. Anger consumed his mind as he rushed back toward the goblin village, determined that they would return his wife and daughter to him, or they would pay the price. He was completely overcome with rage and swore he would personally rip Lentian's head from his shoulders and take everything he possessed. The Tianlun tribe is in a state of commotion as the goblins have returned with an unexpected cargo, having brought back prisoners. The head of the tribe was surprised to see that the goblins had evolved and that an aura of power and magic now emanated from them. One of them is the Furious Goblin, a level 71 mutant with the title and class of a bone-crushing warrior, blessed by God. The second is the Earth Goblin, at level 72, holding the title of Ideal Assassin, with no class but also blessed by God. The power of the Furious One has nearly matched that of the Earthly One, though it is a pity that he is merely a variation of the mutated type. Despite the Furious Goblin's lower base stats, its overall strength has managed to catch up to that of the Earth Goblin. It is possible that specializing in the Assassination class has given him an edge in combat power, and with the addition of equipment, he could become even more formidable. The girl from the Monitor Lizard tribe screamed in horror, identifying herself as the chieftain's wife and demanding that the damn goblins release her. She proclaimed that she was the chief's wife and that no one dared to lay a hand on her, demanding to be let go as they grabbed her by the hair and presented her to Lentian. She vowed that she would compel the chief to kill every last one of them and that none would escape while the young and mature captives were prepared as gifts for the chief. One was young, the other mature, and both were very appetizing, and they were revealed to be the family of the leader of the southern region himself, the damned Mantis. Varantia confirmed that yes, she was his wife, and though she had thought they were afraid of her power, it was now too late, for her husband would surely seek revenge. The fear came too late, as the leader was already aware of who they were, and Lentian smiled, remarking, "This is the wife of the Mantis who threatened to divide my clan and kill me." He recalled how this chief had threatened to destroy his clan, and now he was relieving himself on her, and she could not comprehend what he was doing. The wife was horrified and wished for his death, and without any hesitation, Lentian drew his crossbow and fired, the arrow striking true. Blood streamed from the wound, bringing instantaneous death as she fell without a sound, claimed by death with no one to protect her. The other goblins were then given permission to do as they pleased with the rest, and they bowed in gratitude, wishing their leader a long life. The goblins jostled one another, greedily pushing to be the first to reach the captives, each demanding their share with greedy smiles on their faces. Lentian inquired why they had only captured 2 prisoners, and they explained that they had fought with a tribe of praying mantises and had eaten them all. A few were left behind to allow them to reproduce, so they could be hunted again. And upon hearing this, the tribe leader's expression darkened. The goblins thought that they had not acted according to the plan and wondered if they had made a mistake, vowing to do better next time and not disappoint the chief. The goblins attempted to justify their actions, pleading not to be punished for their error, but Lentian laughed and commended them for their successful mission. He made special mention of Furious, praising him for his initiative and stating that he had not raised him in vain, as he knew how to capture and bring back prey. The chief remarked that it would now be more interesting to see the leader's face, especially when he discovers that his home has been plundered and his family is dead. Varen approached the goblin camp, demanding the return of his wife and daughter, his eyes blazing with rage and a green light emanating from his mouth. His gaze slowly dimmed as he took in the sight of the gnawed bones of those he had once sworn to protect with his life. Before him, the goblins were finishing off the remains of his family. It was too late, and nothing could be faked, as they could not be brought back. Two skulls lay side by side, those of his wife and daughter, and he was enraged that these vile animals had dared to touch them. Lentian stepped out from the shadows, poised for battle with his sword in hand, and he taunted the monitor lizard for having arrived too late. Overcome with grief, Varen swore his revenge, thirsting for a blood-for-blood retribution and vowing to stop at nothing. The initial blow came in an instant as a column of fire erupted from the lizard's mouth, incinerating everything in its path. Lentian employed his magic, and the entire area was enveloped in a blue mist. Varen was struck, his flame was extinguished, but his anger did not subside. The wound flared with pain, and a wave of immense force picked up the monitor lizard and threw it backward. But Lentian was nearby and had no intention of retreating. Lentian struck with his dagger, piercing the leader's chest, and a stream of black blood gushed forth. The pain was excruciating, but the fight had to continue, as his family could not be left unavenged. Blood was seeping from his chest, and Varen attempted to staunch the flow with his palm, but the advantage was clearly on Lentian's side. Varen taunted Lentian, asking if he was blind and had lost sight of him, and why he was not advancing. Lentian promised that since he had come to die, he would assist him in that endeavor, noting that this was the eastern part, and he would likely be unable to summon monsters here. Chief Varen vowed to destroy Lita without anyone's assistance, stating that he did not require servants to eliminate such a small goblin. Suddenly, his body began to glow and his veins bulged as he activated the gross stimulation technique. His body started to expand, becoming covered in scales as power filled him, his muscles swelling with strength and causing the earth to tremble. He now possessed an infinite power, and it was with this power that Lentian intended to fight and confront him. The goblins fell back, frightened by the enemy's transformation, and they warned their chief that this individual looked extremely dangerous. Lentian had already formulated a plan. He would first use the earth element to slow his opponent down and then infect his blood. The battle continued, with one fighting to avenge his family and the other to defend his power, but Varen was suddenly stabbed in the back by a golden sword. Lentian was surprised, wondering who would dare to challenge such a powerful ruler, as even he had found it difficult to defeat him. The chief roared as pain filled him from within, the cowardly blow having robbed him of his chance for retribution. A holy luminescence appeared as the monster was finished, with no chance left for it to survive, and the sword cut it in half. The swordswoman stood behind him, clutching her holy sword. It was she who had delivered the mortal wounds to the monster and had killed Lentian's enemy. She stated that she had finally located him, her eyes appearing lifeless and her gaze lost as she looked at Lentian. Destiny had been fulfilled, as the holy swordswoman had slain the head of the tribe, and the goblins were terrified of her power, knowing she could kill them at any moment. However, she remained off to the side, not moving, as if her mind had been clouded by poison, spells, or some unknown form of magic. Suddenly, she staggered and fell flat on the ground in front of Lentian, her body and mind unable to bear such a heavy load. He was surprised that she had managed to catch up with them, despite her fatigue, and had killed such a monster with the help of a rusty blade. But it was good that she was now unconscious. The goblin drew closer with a triumphant grin on his face, ready to deliver the final blow and finish her off. However, his impulse was met with no response, as none of the other goblins supported him, all of them standing in a tense and silent stillness. In the distance, the goblins were whispering among themselves, discussing how stubborn he was and how his anger knew no bounds. Lentian stopped him, questioning why he would kill her when she was unconscious and posed no threat, his tone calm and reasonable. He argued that her life held far more value than her death, and that in their hands she could be of great use. The command was given to bind the holy swordswoman, and the goblins hurried to carry out the order without delay. A long night, filled with anxiety and a chilling cold, eventually gave way to a cloudy and quiet morning of a new day. The swordswoman lay bound on the floor, still unconscious, and Yue gazed at her while Lenshin stood nearby observing her. Yu watched with a sense of admiration, noting that the girl's skin was unusually soft, almost like that of a porcelain doll. Suddenly, she began to regain consciousness, her eyes fluttering open, but the effects of her past ordeal were still evident, and her strength was depleted. She saw the goblin's slayer knight in Lentian standing before her, and he was smiling as he reminded her that it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. She abruptly jumped up, filled with happiness, exclaiming that she had finally found him after searching for so long. Yu clung to Lentian, who told her not to fuss, stating, "Your energy is too low to cause us any harm." However, she did not respond, instead letting out a shrill scream of Goblin, which shocked both Yui and Lenshin, as her strange behavior was not like her at all. Lenshin wondered what could have happened to her, as she seemed to be out of her mind, and he was surprised by her unexpected reaction. Varen raised his hand, his voice like a command as he ordered the goblins to seize her and hold her at any cost. She suddenly leaped up and lunged toward Lenshin, despite her hands being tied, and ran forward. The goblin did not even see how, in the blink of an eye, the rope was torn from his hands, thus granting the saint her freedom. A silence fell as the tension mounted, and Lentian stood before her, unarmed, as she rushed swiftly toward him, evading capture. The goblins who were watching the scene unfold had no doubt that this would be the conclusion of the chapter.